Hey guys, tonight we're embarking on a journey not just through space, but through an almost unimaginable stretch of time. We're going to leave the comfort of your cozy room, the glow of your screen, and the reassuring hum of modern life, and instead, you'll find yourself trudging up a windswept hill in southeastern Turkey. It's a place so ancient, so untamed, that if you were actually there right now, with just the clothes on your back and no phone signal, you'd probably realize pretty quickly that your survival skills are, let's just say, a work in progress. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from, and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel the dry, ancient earth crunching beneath your boots, a thin layer of dust swirling up with each step, catching the last golden rays of a setting sun. The air is surprisingly crisp, carrying the scent of wild thyme and something else, something indefinable, like old stone and forgotten whispers. You're not just on any hill, you're ascending a place called Göbekli Tepe, which, if you were to translate it from Turkish, means something like Potbelly Hill. Not exactly the most majestic name for what we're about to explore, is it? It's like calling the Great Pyramid of Giza Pointy Sand Pile. But don't let the humble name fool you. This mound, this seemingly unassuming rise in the vast, rolling plains of ancient Anatolia, holds secrets that have utterly rewritten our understanding of human history. As you reach the summit, the wind picks up, tugging at your clothes, making you squint against the faint sting of dust. You turn a slow 360 degrees, taking in the panorama. To the south, the plains stretch endlessly, fading into a hazy horizon, a landscape that has seen countless sunrises and sunsets over millennia. To the north, distant mountain ranges ripple like sleeping giants, their peaks often capped with snow, even when the plains below are parched. There are no bustling cities here, no highways, no glowing lights of civilization. Just the vast, silent expanse of what was once the Fertile Crescent, a cradle of human ingenuity and transformation. It's a land that has been inhabited for an astonishingly long time, with evidence of human presence stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. This region, in fact, forms a critical geographical bridge between continents, influencing migrations and cultural exchanges for millennia. You stand there, a tiny speck on a truly ancient stage, and a strange sensation washes over you. It's not just a physical wind you feel, but a metaphorical one, a current of time that seems to flow right through you. Every gust carries an echo, a faint, almost imperceptible murmur of lives lived, of hands that toiled, of voices that sang or chanted or simply breathed on this very spot, thousands upon thousands of years ago. It's a profound, almost spiritual quiet, broken only by the rustle of dry grasses and the distant cry of some unseen bird of prey. You imagine the sheer solitude, the vastness of the night sky without light pollution, the chilling silence before the dawn. It makes you think about our ancestors, who didn't have GPS or even reliable maps, yet somehow navigated these immense distances. I mean, imagine trying to find this place with just a crude drawing and the stars for guidance. Pretty sure my phone would have died about 3 days into that trip. And that's where the mystery truly begins to settle in, wrapping around you like the twilight shadows. Because what lies beneath your feet, buried for millennia, challenges everything we thought we knew about humanity's journey. This isn't just an old settlement, it's something far more profound. It's a place where time itself seems to whisper forgotten stories, not just of an unimaginable past, but of the unimaginable past, the very dawn of complex human endeavor. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the wind play across your face, trying to truly feel the difference between now and then. Over 11,000 years ago. That's not just a long time ago. That's so far back that it predates the invention of writing by nearly 7,000 years. It predates the wheel by about 6,000 years. It predates the pyramids of Egypt by roughly 7,000 years. To put it another way, Göbekli Tepe is as much older than the pyramids as the pyramids are older than you and me. Let that sink in for a moment. It's a timeline so vast, it almost makes your brain do a little internal hiccup. It's like trying to count grains of sand on a beach that stretches to infinity. The scholars, the archaeologists, the historians, they used to have a pretty neat, tidy narrative about how civilization started. First, we had hunter-gatherers, nomadic people, just trying to survive, living hand to mouth. Then, poof, agriculture was invented. People settled down, started farming, built villages, then cities, then states, and then they started building big, fancy structures like temples. It was a nice, linear progression, a clear path from primitive to profound. It made perfect sense. Except, Göbekli Tepe decided to politely, but firmly, demolish that entire narrative. It's the ultimate historical mic drop. You open your eyes and look down at the ground, where the barest outlines of what look like circular depressions are visible. These aren't natural formations. They are the subtle hints of something monumental buried just beneath the surface, something that required immense effort and organization. The very idea that hunter-gatherers, people who supposedly lived in small, egalitarian bands constantly on the move, could conceive of, let alone build something of this scale, was utterly unthinkable just a few decades ago. It was like finding out your pet hamster built a fully functioning space shuttle. It just didn't compute with the established models. This region, often called Upper Mesopotamia or the Northern Levant, wasn't just some random spot. It was a vibrant, ecologically rich zone at the end of the last ice age, a kind of natural larder bursting with wild grains and herds of animals. This abundance, some scholars theorize, might have provided the necessary stability for these early people to dedicate time and resources to something other than immediate survival. Historians still argue whether the initial abundance of wild resources or the looming threat of resource depletion was the primary driver for early complex social organization in this area. It's a chicken or egg question for the ages, except with ancient grains and very large T-shaped pillars. You can almost feel the presence of those ancient people, not as ghosts, but as echoes in the landscape. What was their motivation? What drove them to dedicate generations to this incredible, slow, painstaking construction? It wasn't a fort, it wasn't a city, and it certainly wasn't a farm. This was something else entirely. It was a place where, perhaps, the very concept of community, of shared belief, of a collective purpose beyond mere subsistence, was forged. It was a place where, for the first time, humanity might have truly looked up at the stars and decided to build something equally grand, something that connected them to the cosmos itself. And it wasn't just one structure. What you're standing on is a series of massive, circular enclosures, each one a testament to an incredible feat of engineering and social coordination, all built by people who, by all previous accounts, shouldn't have been capable of such things. Imagine trying to get a few hundred of your friends to agree on a pizza topping, let alone coordinating them to quarry, carve, and move multi-ton stones across rugged terrain without so much as a wheelbarrow, let alone a forklift. It's a logistical nightmare, an organizational marvel. And they did it. Again and again. For centuries. The wind whispers again, carrying what feels like the weight of those unanswered questions, those untold stories. You are on the threshold of a truly profound discovery, a place where the very fabric of human history has been rewoven, thread by painstaking thread. This isn't just a site, it's a portal, a window into a time when the world was new, when humanity was just beginning to grasp the power of collective action, of shared belief, and of building something that transcended the immediate needs of the body, reaching instead for the deeper needs of the soul. The air is growing colder now, the stars beginning to prick through the deepening blue, and the silence of the ancient hill is absolute. You are standing on the edge of the known, looking back into the truly unknown. You stand on that windswept hill, the sun warm on your face, and the dry air hinting at ancient secrets. But let's rewind a bit, shall we? Because before Göbekli Tepe became a whispered legend and a star of archaeological documentaries, it was, well, just a hill. A big, unassuming mound of earth and rock, known locally as a tell, which is essentially an artificial hill formed over millennia by layers of human habitation. Imagine your own backyard, but instead of just grass, it's got 1,000 years of forgotten barbecue pits and old garden gnomes buried underneath. Now multiply that by a few thousand. For decades, this particular tell, known as Göbekli Tepe, a name that charmingly translates to Potbelly Hill, was considered nothing much. Local farmers, going about their very ancient business of farming, would occasionally unearth odd, carved stones. Sometimes they'd even use them as fence posts. Just another Tuesday. In the 1960s, archaeologists from the University of Chicago, doing a regional survey, briefly noted the site. They saw some scattered flint chips and fragments of limestone. Their conclusion? Probably just a medieval cemetery. Nothing to see here, folks, move along. Archaeologists, bless their hearts, sometimes miss the forest for the really, really old trees. It's like glancing at a dusty old book and dismissing it as a phone directory, only to find out later it's the lost works of Shakespeare. So, for over 30 years, Potbelly Hill sat there, patiently waiting. The wind continued to sculpt its surface, the sun rose and set, and the occasional shepherd and their flock were its only regular visitors. It was just another bump in the vast, ancient landscape of southeastern Turkey, ignored by the very people whose profession was to unearth the past. It's almost comical, isn't it? The biggest archaeological discovery in generations, hiding in plain sight, dismissed as a bunch of old gravestones. Then, in 1994, a very particular kind of stubbornness arrived on the scene in the form of Klaus Schmidt. A German archaeologist with the German Archaeological Institute, Schmidt had a hunch. He'd been working in the region, and something about this particular hill, despite its previous dismissal, just felt different. Perhaps it was the way the light hit it in the late afternoon, or maybe it was just a gut feeling that there was more than met the eye. Or maybe he just really liked digging. Whatever it was, he decided to take a closer look, initiating a new survey in 1995. You can almost feel the dry dust crunching under your boots as you join his small team, pickaxes and shovels at the ready. The initial days are likely mundane. You're systematically clearing away topsoil, expecting more of the same, maybe a few medieval pottery shards, the odd bone fragment. It's hot, it's dusty, and you're probably wondering if you should have just stayed home and watched paint dry. This is the glamorous life of archaeology, where 99% is tedious grunt work and 1% is a heart-stopping, world-shattering discovery. And then it happens. A pickaxe hits something solid. Not just a random rock, but something with an unnatural edge. You clear away more dirt, and another edge appears. And another. Slowly, meticulously, the earth begins to give up its secrets. What emerges isn't a scattering of stones, or a simple wall, or even the remains of a humble medieval grave. No. What begins to reveal itself is massive. It's organized. It's carved. The first clear sign of something truly extraordinary comes with the discovery of the first T-shaped pillar. Imagine the moment, a massive, perfectly upright stone, standing perhaps 18 feet tall, slowly emerging from the earth. It's not just a block, it has a distinct, stylized shape, almost like a giant, abstract human figure with no head, arms akimbo. And then, etched into its surface, are animals. Not crude stick figures, but detailed, vibrant depictions of boars, foxes, snakes, and birds, almost leaping from the stone. The shock isn't just about finding a pillar. It's about finding a whole array of them, arranged in perfect circles, like some ancient, Stone Age Stonehenge on steroids. You're clearing away the earth, and more of these colossal, intricately carved monuments just keep appearing. One enclosure, then another, each with its own set of towering T-pillars, some weighing upwards of 10 to 20 tons. You'd think building a shed was hard. Try this without a single power tool, or even a helpful YouTube tutorial. It's enough to make you drop your trowel and question everything you thought you knew. And that's precisely what happened. The disbelief wasn't just a fleeting emotion, it was a profound, intellectual earthquake. Because, according to all known archaeological paradigms of the time, this simply could not exist. Not here. Not then. Let's put this into perspective. For decades, the accepted mainstream historical fact was that monumental architecture, large, complex structures requiring significant communal effort, only emerged after the development of agriculture. The theory went like this: you settle down, farm the land, get a surplus of food, then you have enough people and enough free time to build big stuff. Think Jericho, one of the earliest known permanent settlements, dating to around 9000 BC, with its impressive walls. Or Stonehenge, around 3000 to 2000 BC. The Egyptian pyramids, much later still. These were the pinnacles of early civilization, built by settled, agricultural societies. But Göbekli Tepe was different. Radiocarbon dating, a meticulous and repeatedly verified process, pushed the age of these structures back, not by decades or centuries, but by millennia. The earliest layers, where the most monumental structures were found, dated to roughly 9600 BC, some going back even further to 10,000 BC or earlier. This wasn't just older than Stonehenge, it was older than the idea of Stonehenge. It was older than Jericho. It was so old, it predated the widespread adoption of agriculture. It was built by hunter-gatherers. Hunter-gatherers. People who, by definition, moved around, followed the herds, foraged for plants. They lived in small, egalitarian bands. They didn't have permanent settlements. They certainly didn't have the social organization, the tools, or the supposed surplus of resources to quarry, carve, transport, and erect multi-ton stone pillars. They didn't even have pottery yet. Finding Göbekli Tepe was like finding a fully functioning iPhone in a cave painting, utterly out of place, defying every expectation about the technological and social capabilities of the era. The initial reaction from the broader archaeological community was, understandably, a mix of awe and deep skepticism. "Are you sure about those dates, Klaus?" You can almost hear them asking. "Are you absolutely certain this isn't some later construction?" But the evidence was overwhelming. The stratigraphy, the undisturbed layers of earth, the consistent radiocarbon dates from charcoal found within the backfill, it all pointed to an undeniable, impossible truth. This was real. This was ancient. This was built by people who, according to our textbooks, shouldn't have been able to build anything more complex than a really sturdy lean-to. It's like showing up to a fancy dinner party in a toga and everyone else is in sweatpants. You just broke the dress code of history. The discovery of Göbekli Tepe immediately challenged the long-held assumption that civilization began with agriculture. Instead, it hinted that monumental religious or ceremonial sites might have preceded agriculture, perhaps even inspired it. It completely flipped the script. A quirky tidbit that adds to the almost mythical aura of the site is that the initial discovery of the first carved stones on Göbekli Tepe wasn't actually by an archaeologist, but by a local shepherd named Mehmet Yildiz. He found them in the early 1980s and reported them to the Sanliurfa Museum. The museum staff, recognizing their ancient origins but not their monumental significance, simply added them to their collection. It wasn't until Schmidt's focused and systematic investigation a decade later that the true, mind-boggling scale of what lay beneath the hill began to unfold. So, in a way, the very first glimpse was by someone tending their flock, long before the academic world understood the impossible truth staring them in the face. Historians still argue whether the initial surveys truly missed the science, or if the site's true nature was simply too inconceivable for the prevailing archaeological mindsets of the time. Perhaps it was a bit of both. But one thing is for sure: the moment the first T-shaped pillars emerged from the earth under Klaus Schmidt's careful supervision, the archaeological world was sent reeling. The impossible had just become real, and the story of human civilization was about to get a dramatic, earth-shattering rewrite. Now, let's gently close our eyes and take a deep, slow breath together. Feel the soft hum of your own existence, right here, right now. And as you exhale, imagine that breath carrying you not just across miles, but across millennia. You are drifting back in time, past the empires, past the cities, past the very first farms, back, over 11,000 years ago. You're hovering above what we now call southeastern Turkey, but it's a place you wouldn't recognize. Not a single field of wheat stretches to the horizon, no domesticated sheep bleat in corrals, no smoke rises from permanent villages. The landscape beneath you is wild, untamed, and breathtakingly vibrant. This isn't the barren, dusty Middle East you might picture from documentaries about later civilizations. Oh no. This is a land bursting with life, a fertile crescent in its truest, most ancient sense. Picture rolling hills carpeted in thick, wild grasses, swaying gently in a breeze that carries the scent of damp earth and blooming wildflowers. Ancient oak and pistachio forests dot the landscape, their branches heavy with nuts and berries. Rivers, swollen with glacial meltwater from the distant mountains, carve deep, verdant valleys teeming with fish. This wasn't a world that needed to be coaxed into generosity. It was generous, offering its bounty freely to those who knew how to find it. And who were those people? They were the original experts of this planet, the master navigators of its seasons, the connoisseurs of its wild larder. They were hunter-gatherers. The very phrase often conjures images of desperate, starving souls eking out a brutal existence, always one step from oblivion. But let's gently disabuse ourselves of that rather dramatic notion. For many, many millennia, this was humanity's default, and often, it was a pretty good gig. Imagine your ancestors, not stuck in a cubicle, but living a life deeply intertwined with nature, their very survival dependent on an intimate, encyclopedic knowledge of their surroundings. They knew every berry bush, every migratory path, every edible root. They were the ultimate survivalists, long before reality TV made it a competition. You might be wondering what their daily routine looked like. Well, forget your 9 to 5. Their schedule was dictated by the sun, the moon, and the movements of the animals. You'd wake with the dawn, perhaps to the distant call of a wild gazelle, or the rustle of a boar in the undergrowth. Your first task might be to scout for fresh tracks, or to check on the wild barley patches you'd been monitoring. There was no alarm clock, no commute, just the immediate, tangible needs of the day. And while they certainly worked, hunting large game, processing hides, gathering heavy loads of wild grains, their workday was often surprisingly efficient. Some archaeologists even posit that early hunter-gatherers enjoyed more leisure time than many of us do today, certainly more than the first farmers, who quickly became tied to the relentless demands of their crops. Their tools were simple, yet incredibly effective: razor-sharp flint blades for butchering and preparing hides, sturdy wooden digging sticks for unearthing tubers, bone awls for sewing, and cleverly crafted spear throwers that could send a projectile with impressive force and accuracy. You wouldn't find a hammer, a chisel, or a level that looked anything like what you'd see in a modern toolbox. Their technology was organic, born from the very materials the earth provided, shaped by hands that knew the subtle language of stone and wood. Imagine the quiet, rhythmic tap-tap-tap of a flint knapper, carefully shaping a blade, each strike a testament to generations of accumulated skill. It's a sound that could lull you to sleep, isn't it? These people lived in small, mobile bands, typically ranging from a few dozen to perhaps 100 individuals. Their social structures were likely egalitarian, with decisions made collectively, perhaps around a crackling fire under a sky absolutely ablaze with stars, unmarred by light pollution. You wouldn't find kings or queens, no standing armies, no complex hierarchies dominating vast populations. Leadership, if it existed in a formal sense, was probably situational, based on wisdom, experience, or prowess in a particular skill, like hunting or healing. They moved with the seasons, following the game, harvesting the wild fruits and grains as they ripened in different areas. Their homes were temporary shelters, perhaps hide tents, or simple huts fashioned from branches and reeds, easily dismantled and re-erected in a new, resource-rich location. The concept of home was less about a fixed address and more about the land itself, the familiar cycle of its bounty. And this is the crucial point, the one that makes Göbekli Tepe so utterly mind-bending. These people, these incredibly skilled, knowledgeable, yet nomadic hunter-gatherers, had not yet conceived of agriculture. The idea of deliberately planting seeds, tending fields, or domesticating animals for food was still thousands of years in the future. They didn't grow wheat, they gathered it, stalk by stalk, from the wild stands that grew naturally in abundance. They didn't herd cattle, they hunted wild aurochs, massive, formidable beasts that roamed the plains. This was life before the Great Shift, before humanity decided to settle down and try to control nature, rather than simply living within its flow. Historians still argue whether the transition to agriculture was a sudden epiphany or a gradual evolution, but what's clear is that around Göbekli Tepe, the wild resources were so plentiful that there was little immediate need to farm. Think about it. Why bother toiling in a field, waiting for a harvest, when delicious, nutritious wild grains and abundant game were freely available for the taking? It's like having a perfectly stocked, organic grocery store just outside your tent, and someone suggesting you instead spend all day digging a vegetable patch. Most people would probably opt for the free groceries, right? So, this wasn't a struggling, desperate population. It was a people deeply attuned to their environment, thriving on its natural generosity. Yet, despite this seemingly perfect, unburdened existence, something profound was stirring within these mobile bands. Something that would compel them to undertake a project of unimaginable scale and complexity. A project that would defy every expectation we have about how societies functioned before the agricultural revolution. They were living light, moving freely, yet they were about to embark on something that required immense, sustained, collective effort, something that seems utterly contradictory to their very way of life. They were about to build. And not just a simple hut. They were about to build a temple. The world's first, as far as we know. A structure so monumental, it would challenge everything we thought we knew about human ingenuity and social organization in the deep past. This was a time of immense environmental knowledge, of intimate connection to the wild, and yet, also a time when the seeds of something entirely new were about to be sown, not in a field, but in the minds and hands of these remarkable, pre-agricultural people. You're still standing there, aren't you? On that windswept hill, the sun just starting to dip, casting long, strange shadows over the T-pillars. And you're still wrestling with the sheer impossibility of it all. Because just a moment ago, we were picturing a world of nomadic hunter-gatherers, right? People living day to day, following the herds, gathering what the land offered, always ready to pack up their few possessions and move to the next abundant spot. Their lives were a symphony of movement, a dance with the seasons. Survival was their constant companion, their primary motivator. So, here's the million-dollar question, the one that keeps archaeologists up at night, staring at their ceiling, probably muttering about ancient rock. What in the name of all that is prehistoric sparked the intent to build something like Göbekli Tepe? What profound, seismic shift in human society had to occur for these incredibly resourceful, yet seemingly unrooted, people to decide? You know what? Let's just spend centuries, maybe even millennia, hauling multi-ton stones up a hill to build a giant, circular temple. For reasons. Probably good ones. It's like asking your perpetually backpacking friend, who insists on living out of a duffel bag, to suddenly commit to building a 5-bedroom mansion. With a moat. And then to do it with only flint tools. It simply doesn't compute with our modern understanding of how societies evolve. We've always been taught that agriculture came first, right? That settled life, with its stable food sources and permanent dwellings, enabled the development of complex social structures, specialized labor, and monumental architecture. You know the whole. Food surplus leads to free time leads to art and temples. Narrative. It's a classic. But Göbekli Tepe just waltzes onto the scene, tips its massive stone hat, and says, "Nah, fam. We did it differently." Imagine the conversations. Picture a group of these ancient folks, perhaps gathered around a flickering fire after a successful hunt, bellies full, the stars incredibly bright overhead. One of them, maybe a particularly charismatic elder, or perhaps someone who had a really vivid dream, suddenly stands up. "Listen," they might say, gesturing wildly with a half-eaten gazelle leg. "I've had an idea. Instead of just living here, what if we built something? Something enormous. Something that doesn't move. Something that says, 'We were here,' really, really loudly." And instead of everyone just politely nodding and then going back to gnawing on their dinner, they actually agreed. And then they did it. For generations. Without Facebook groups or project managers named Brenda. This wasn't just a few clever individuals deciding to stack some rocks. This was a societal pivot of epic proportions. It suggests a fundamental shift in their worldview, a reprioritization of collective effort away from purely subsistence activities. It implies a new kind of social cohesion, a shared vision so compelling that it could unite disparate groups of hunter-gatherers, who traditionally operated in smaller, more fluid bands. What could be so important, so utterly foundational, that it could inspire such a monumental undertaking? Well, one leading theory suggests it was precisely not about survival in the purely physical sense, but about spiritual survival, about meaning. These colossal structures, with their intricate carvings and precise alignments, scream sacred space. They weren't homes. They weren't granaries. They were places of profound ritual, gathering points for ceremonies that must have been incredibly significant to these early humans. It's almost as if, having mastered the art of surviving in the wild, they turned their attention to mastering their place in the cosmos. They wanted to connect with something larger than themselves, to understand the forces that shaped their world. And they decided the best way to do that was to build a really, really big stone circle. Because why not? Think about it. If you're a hunter-gatherer, your life is intimately tied to the natural world. You observe the stars, the seasons, the behavior of animals. You probably have a deep, spiritual connection to the land and its creatures. Perhaps Göbekli Tepe emerged from a desire to formalize that connection, to create a permanent stage for their most important rituals. It's like deciding that instead of just having your annual family reunion at whoever's house has the biggest backyard, you're going to build a dedicated, custom-designed, multi-generational reunion center, with a very strict dress code involving animal pelts. This shift hints at the emergence of early forms of complex society, even before the trappings we usually associate with civilization. It wasn't about a king or a central government decreeing, "Thou shalt build a temple." Rather, it was a collective decision, driven by shared beliefs and a common purpose. This is where the idea of feasting comes in, which is a pretty mainstream historical fact about Göbekli Tepe. Evidence from the site, like massive quantities of wild animal bones, gazelle, aurochs, a giant extinct wild cattle, wild ass, suggests that these gatherings weren't just solemn affairs. They were likely huge, multi-day parties, perhaps drawing people from hundreds of miles away. Imagine the ancient equivalent of a massive music festival, but instead of glow sticks, everyone's carrying giant rocks. These feasts would have been crucial for solidifying social bonds, reinforcing shared identities, and distributing resources. They were the glue that held this ambitious project together, providing both the incentive and the means for large groups to congregate and cooperate. Come for the spiritual enlightenment, stay for the roasted wild boar. It's a marketing strategy as old as time. And this leads us to one of the most intriguing, almost quirky, tidbits about the spark of intent, the possibility that the act of building itself was a central part of the ritual. It wasn't just about the finished product, the grand temple. The very process of quarrying, moving, and erecting those massive stones could have been a collective spiritual endeavor, a form of communal meditation or prayer in action. Each swing of a primitive tool, each strained heave on a rope, was an offering, a testament to their devotion. It's a bit like how some modern-day ultramarathon runners will tell you the real spiritual experience isn't crossing the finish line, but the sheer, agonizing, beautiful process of putting one foot in front of the other for days on end. Only, instead of blisters, these folks probably had permanent shoulder indentations from carrying T-pillars. This collective effort, this shared vision, is what truly sets Göbekli Tepe apart. It challenges the conventional narrative that complex societies, with their hierarchies and specialized labor, only emerged after the agricultural revolution provided a stable food surplus. Göbekli Tepe flips the script, suggesting that the desire for communal ritual and shared identity might have been the driver for social complexity, rather than its result. It makes you wonder if maybe, just maybe, the need for a place to put all those feasting guests and perform those mysterious rituals was what eventually pushed people towards managing wild resources more intensely, perhaps leading them down the path to cultivating grains and domesticating animals. And this, dear listener, brings us to the heart of a truly fascinating open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the construction of Göbekli Tepe drove the shift towards agriculture and settled life, or if early, nascent forms of resource management made such monumental construction possible in the first place? Was the temple a consequence of a burgeoning, slightly more settled lifestyle? Or was it the very catalyst that forced hunter-gatherers to innovate, to find ways to support larger populations in one place for longer periods? Did the need to feed hundreds of stone haulers and carvers push them to domesticate wild cereals and sheep? It's the ultimate chicken or egg scenario, but with much heavier eggs. Whatever the precise sequence, the spark of intent at Göbekli Tepe represents a profound turning point in human history. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about community, about meaning, about reaching for something beyond the tangible. It was about building a legacy in stone, a silent, powerful declaration that would echo across millennia. And that, in itself, is a pretty profound reason to pick up a heavy stone and start hauling. You stand there now, the dust motes dancing in the golden shafts of sunlight that pierce the excavated earth, and you begin to truly grasp the foundational enigmas that Göbekli Tepe presents. It's one thing to hear about ancient structures, but quite another to feel the sheer, unyielding presence of these earliest, most enigmatic enclosures. Imagine the moment the archaeologists, trowel by careful trowel, first cleared away millennia of soil and debris, exposing these colossal stones. It must have felt like uncovering a secret handshake from a forgotten epoch, a message carved in stone that screamed, "We were here, and we did something impossible." As the layers of earth were peeled back, what emerged was a series of vast, circular enclosures, each one a testament to an ambition that simply shouldn't have existed at this point in human history. You gaze into one of these circles, say Enclosure D, which is one of the most thoroughly excavated. It's not just a haphazard collection of rocks. Oh no, this is a meticulously planned architectural marvel. You see massive, T-shaped pillars, some standing over 18 feet tall and weighing up to 20 tons, arranged in a precise ring. It's like a prehistoric Stonehenge, but with a design that feels more intimate, more intentional, despite its overwhelming scale. Within each circular enclosure, two even larger T-shaped pillars stand proudly at the center, like silent, ancient guardians. They face each other, almost as if engaged in an eternal, whispered conversation. These aren't just decorative elements. They are the heart of the structure, the focal point around which everything else revolves. You can almost feel the gravitational pull they exerted on the people who built them, drawing them into a sacred space, a cosmic embrace. It's a bit like finding out your great-great-great-grandparents, who you thought were just living in mud huts, actually built the Empire State Building using only really big spoons. The scale is just bewildering. The arrangement of these massive stones defied all known understanding of what early human societies were capable of. Before Göbekli Tepe, the prevailing mainstream historical fact was that monumental architecture, the kind that required organized labor, complex planning, and a settled population, only emerged after the development of agriculture. It was believed that surplus food from farming allowed people to specialize, to build, to create hierarchies. But here, over 11,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers, people who lived day to day, following animal migrations and foraging for wild plants, somehow managed to conceive, design, and execute this incredible feat. It's like watching a group of toddlers suddenly perform a perfect neurosurgery. It just doesn't compute with our previous understanding of their developmental stage. You trace the lines of the T-shaped pillars with your eyes. They aren't just rough-hewn blocks. No, these stones were carefully shaped, their flat surfaces smoothed, their edges defined. And the T-shape itself is fascinating. Some scholars propose these are highly stylized human figures, with the crossbar representing the head and arms, and the vertical shaft the body. If you squint just right, you can almost see the suggestion of shoulders, perhaps even hands resting on the front of the body, though without any facial features. They remain enigmatic. This quirky or fringe tidbit suggests a deep symbolic meaning, turning these architectural elements into silent, watchful deities or ancestors. It adds another layer of mystery to their presence. Were these representations of gods, spirits, or perhaps the builders themselves, eternally standing guard? The precision with which these stones were placed is another head-scratcher. They fit together, not with mortar, but with an interlocking design, sometimes using small stone wedges to secure them. Imagine trying to maneuver a multi-ton stone with such accuracy using only leverage and brute force. It's a logistical nightmare that would make even modern construction crews scratch their heads and demand more coffee. You can almost hear the ancient project manager yelling, "Left a bit! No, your other left! We are not doing this again!" The very act of creating these structures suggests a level of social organization that archaeologists had previously believed impossible for hunter-gatherer societies. How did they coordinate hundreds, perhaps thousands, of individuals to quarry these stones from distant sites, transport them, and then erect them with such precision? There's no evidence of a king, a priestly class, or a central authority to command such labor. It suggests a shared vision, a communal purpose so powerful that it transcended individual needs and drove a collective effort on an unprecedented scale. It's like a really effective neighborhood watch program, but instead of reporting suspicious activity, they're building a temple. You feel the cool smoothness of the stone as you run your hand along one of the pillars. The surface is worn by time, but the original carvings are still visible, hinting at the stories these stones were meant to tell. The arrangement of these enclosures, one after another, sometimes partially overlapping, sometimes clearly distinct, poses a monumental question. Why build them this way? Was it a progression of ideas, each new circle an improvement, or a new iteration of a sacred concept? Or were they built concurrently, each serving a different yet related purpose? Historians still argue whether the circular enclosures were roofed or open to the sky. Some suggest a light, perishable roof of animal hides or reeds might have covered parts of them, creating a more enclosed, mysterious space. Others argue they were entirely open, allowing the builders to directly observe the celestial bodies, perhaps aligning the pillars with certain stars or constellations. The lack of clear evidence for roofing makes it hard to say definitively, leaving it as one of the many ongoing scholarly debates. Imagine trying to put a roof on something like this without modern cranes. That's a whole different level of do-it-yourself project. The sheer effort, the meticulous planning, and the collective will require to construct these enclosures without the supposed prerequisites of civilization, agriculture, settled towns, social hierarchy, are what make Göbekli Tepe so profoundly enigmatic. It wasn't just a place of worship. It was a workshop of the human spirit, a crucible where the very idea of community, purpose, and monumental aspiration was forged. You can almost hear the soft hum of ancient voices, the rhythmic thud of stone on stone, the shared breath of people united by a common, incomprehensible goal. It's a silent symphony of human endeavor, played out over centuries, echoing through the ages. You've seen the monumental scale from a distance, felt the impossible weight of their presence. But now, let's get our hands, metaphorically of course, a little dusty. You stand at the edge of what looks like an ancient quarry, a vast, scooped-out bowl of limestone, not far from the main Göbekli Tepe site. This isn't just a pile of rocks, it's where the magic, or rather, the sheer, mind-boggling effort, truly began. Imagine the crisp Anatolian air, perhaps a bit warmer than today, but still carrying the scent of dry earth and ancient stone. You're looking at the raw material for the world's first temple, a sprawling, relatively soft, but still incredibly stubborn, limestone bedrock. These weren't just picking up pebbles, you understand. We're talking about extracting colossal, multi-ton slabs from the ground, without the benefit of anything more advanced than, well, other rocks. No dynamite. No excavators. Not even a simple iron chisel. If you're anything like me, your first thought is probably, how on earth did they do that? And trust me, you're not alone. The process of quarrying, of coaxing these enormous T-shaped pillars from the earth, was a feat of engineering patience that would make a modern construction crew weep into their hard hats. They didn't just hack away randomly. Instead, our ancient builders possessed an intimate, generational knowledge of the stone itself. They knew its grain, its weaknesses, its stubborn strengths. You can almost see them, eyes squinting in the harsh sun, tracing invisible lines on the bedrock, planning their attack. Their primary tools were other, even harder stones. Think of it, basalt, dolomite, and chert, tougher, more resilient rocks, painstakingly shaped into heavy hammers, wedges, and chisels. You pick up a hypothetical stone hammer. It's heavy, rough, and perfectly fits the palm of your hand. It feels primitive, yes, but also incredibly ergonomic, a testament to countless hours of use and refinement. You can almost hear the rhythmic thud-thud-thud echoing across the plateau, day in and day out, as groups of strong, determined individuals pounded away at the limestone. It wasn't about brute force alone, it was about focused, repetitive impact, slowly, painstakingly, breaking the stone's resolve. They would have identified a suitable block of limestone, perhaps one already showing natural fissures or weaknesses. Then, they'd begin to create channels around the desired monolith, meticulously pounding and chipping away at the surrounding rock. It's like trying to cut a cake with a spoon, but the cake is made of rock and the spoon is also made of rock, and you're trying to make a perfectly straight cut that's 10 feet deep. Once the channels were deep enough, they might have used wooden wedges. Picture this: wooden stakes driven into cracks, then soaked with water. As the wood absorbed the moisture, it would expand with incredible force, slowly, imperceptibly, prying the massive stone block free from its rocky embrace. It's a method that predates modern hydraulics by millennia, a testament to their cleverness, and it probably took days, maybe even weeks, to free a single pillar. Now, imagine the dust. Oh, the dust! It would have been everywhere, coating hair, clinging to sweat-soaked skin, filling the air with a fine, chalky haze. Every breath would have been a taste of the earth they were reshaping. Their hands, you notice, are callous beyond belief, fingers thick and strong, nails probably broken and chipped. This wasn't a job for the faint of heart, or for anyone who preferred clean clothes. Their gym membership was mandatory, and the workout was eternal. Once a colossal T-pillar was freed from the quarry, it often received its initial, rough shaping right there. Why lug an extra ton of unnecessary limestone across miles of uneven terrain if you don't have to? So, with more pounding and abrading, they would begin to define the iconic T-shape, knocking off the largest protrusions, making it marginally easier to transport. This initial shaping was like the first draft of a masterpiece, crude but defining. Then came the meticulous carving. This is where the true artistry and precision become breathtakingly apparent. You walk closer to one of the partially carved pillars still lying in the quarry, abandoned for reasons we'll get to later. You run your hand over its surface. It's smoother than you'd expect, considering the tools. The outlines of animals, a fox, a snake, a wild boar, are deeply etched into the stone. How did they achieve such detail? Again, it was all about stone-on-stone action. For finer carving, they would have used smaller, sharper pieces of chert or obsidian, flaked to create incredibly keen edges. These weren't used for cutting in the modern sense, but more for scraping, incising, and abrading. Think of it as an ancient form of sandblasting, but instead of air and sand, it was human muscle, water, and abrasive grit. They would grind away at the surface, perhaps using a slurry of water and sand to help wear down the limestone, slowly, patiently, revealing the form beneath. It's like carving soap. If the soap was as hard as rock and your only tool was a slightly harder, smaller rock. No Home Depot runs for these guys to pick up a new set of power chisels, that's for sure. Their tool budget was effectively zero, relying entirely on what nature provided and their own ingenuity. The precision of these carvings, given the primitive tools, is truly astounding. The animals aren't just crude stick figures. They are rendered with a dynamic sense of movement and anatomical accuracy. You see a snake coiling, its scales almost visible, or a boar with bristling fur. This level of detail suggests not only incredible skill but also a deep understanding of the creatures themselves, likely observed intimately in their daily lives. It also implies a remarkable ability to visualize the final form before beginning. They probably had to invent the concept of measure twice, carve once on the fly, because there were no do-overs with a mistake on a multi-ton pillar. Mainstream historical fact *: it is widely accepted by archaeologists that the primary tools used for quarrying and carving at Göbekli Tepe were made exclusively from stone, specifically harder stones like chert, flint, obsidian, basalt, and dolomite, utilized in various forms such as hammers, picks, and abrasive grinders. The absence of metal tools at this period is a fundamental aspect of understanding their technological constraints and achievements. One quirky tidbit about their methods, though, is the sheer, almost inexplicable consistency of the carving style across different pillars and enclosures. While individual artists might have had their own flair, there's an overarching aesthetic, a shared visual language that speaks to a deeply ingrained artistic tradition. It's as if the knowledge of how to properly carve a specific animal, say a fox, was not just taught but felt, passed down through generations not just as technique but as a sacred understanding of form. Some researchers even speculate that certain individuals were specialized master carvers, whose unique skills were highly valued and perhaps even ritually significant. It really makes you wonder about the apprenticeship program back then. Probably less about PowerPoint presentations and more about getting hands-on with a big rock. Open scholarly debate phrase * archaeologists still debate the exact sequence of carving, whether the detailed reliefs were predominantly done while the pillars lay horizontally in the quarry or on the ground at the site, or if some final touches were added after the massive stones were erected. Given the difficulty of working on a vertical surface with primitive tools, it's most likely much of the intricate work was done before erection, but fine-tuning could have happened later. The sheer scale of this carving operation, the number of tools that would have been required and constantly replaced, the hours upon hours of repetitive labor, it's mind-boggling. It speaks to a level of organized effort and dedication that seems almost impossible for societies we traditionally considered simple, hunter-gatherers. They weren't just surviving, they were building, creating, dedicating enormous chunks of their lives to this monumental endeavor. And they did it all without a single power tool, without a blueprint on paper, and certainly without a time off for good behavior policy. They simply had an unwavering vision, calloused hands, and an awful lot of rocks. You've just seen the colossal T-shaped pillars still embedded in the earth, waiting to be unearthed. Now let's imagine them not waiting but moving. This is where the story gets really sweaty. You're standing, perhaps a little winded from your imaginary trek, on the very ground where these ancient builders toiled. And believe me, toil doesn't even begin to cover it. Picture this. You're not in a modern quarry with laser-guided saws and monstrous cranes. Oh no. You're back over 11,000 years ago, surrounded by a landscape that's rugged, undulating, and probably a lot less manicured than your average backyard. The stones, freshly carved from the nearby limestone bedrock, are not light. Far from it. We're talking about pillars that weigh, on average, between 10 and 20 tons. That's like trying to move 2 or 3 full-grown elephants. Only these elephants are made of solid, unyielding stone and they absolutely refuse to cooperate unless you apply immense, sustained force. Some of the largest, like the unfinished behemoth still lying in its quarry bed, tip the scales at an estimated 50 tons. 50. That's a whole blue whale, if blue whales were rectangular and terribly un-whale-like. Just imagine the ancient equivalent of someone saying, "Right, chaps, let's just pop this whale over here." You'd probably laugh, then cry, then offer to help, then cry again. So, how do you move a stone whale without wheels, without draft animals, and without any metal tools stronger than a sturdy obsidian blade or a basalt hammerstone? This is where ingenuity meets brute force, where every muscle in your body would have screamed in protest, and where the concept of teamwork took on a whole new, existential meaning. First, you have to get the carved pillar out of the quarry. It's not just popping it out like a loose tooth. You've painstakingly chipped away at its sides and base, leaving it attached by a narrow pedestal, or keel, of rock. The final separation likely involved wedges and levers, perhaps even a bit of controlled undermining. You'd gather around, a dozen, maybe 20 strong backs, straining against thick ropes made of animal hide or woven plant fibers. You pull, you heave, you grunt. The stone groans, a deep, resonant sound that echoes in the raw, open quarry. Then, with a sudden, bone-jarring lurch, it breaks free. The air fills with dust, the smell of damp earth, and the collective sigh of relief from everyone involved. You've done it! Stage 1 complete. Now for the fun part, getting it to the temple site. The distance from the quarry to the various enclosures at Göbekli Tepe isn't miles and miles, but it's not a hop, skip, and a jump either. We're talking about distances that could range from a few hundred meters to over a kilometer, across ground that isn't flat. It's rocky. It's uneven. It's definitely not paved. Imagine trying to drag your refrigerator across a gravel driveway, uphill, in the mud. Now multiply that by about 1,000, and replace your refrigerator with a stone monument that's wider than you are tall. The most commonly accepted theory, a mainstream historical fact that applies to almost all megalithic construction before the advent of the wheel for heavy loads, involves a combination of sledges, rollers, and sheer human muscle. You wouldn't just drag the raw stone. You'd carefully lower it onto a sturdy wooden sledge, a kind of flat platform designed to distribute the immense weight. This sledge would be made of thick, heavy timbers, perhaps lashed together. Then, the real dance begins. You'd position sturdy logs, tree trunks, probably debarked and smoothed, beneath the sledge. These are your rollers. As you pull the sledge forward, the logs roll, providing a much lower friction surface than dragging directly on the ground. But here's the rub: as the sledge moves forward, the logs at the back become exposed. So, you'd have a continuous process, someone at the back, grabbing the now free log, running it to the front, and carefully placing it back under the sledge, just in time for the next forward motion. It's like a human conveyor belt, but instead of delicious sushi, you're moving a stubborn, multi-ton rock. This is where the coordination really kicks in. One person places the log, another signals the pull, and hundreds of people groan in unison. It's less a gentle ASMR whisper and more a primal, guttural roar. And what about those hundreds of people? You're not just talking about a few strong individuals. For a 10-ton pillar, estimates suggest you'd need at least 500,000 people pulling on ropes, depending on the terrain and gradient. For the 50-ton monster, well, you're probably looking at several thousand. Imagine the sheer logistical nightmare of feeding, watering, and organizing such a massive workforce in a pre-agricultural society. No lunch breaks, no union reps, just the promise of cosmic alignment, presumably. It makes modern construction sites look like a picnic. You hear the foreman yelling, "All right, lads, just a few more meters. Think of the eternal glory. And maybe a nice piece of gazelle jerky later." The terrain itself was a constant adversary. You couldn't just roll the pillars downhill and hope for the best, unless the best involved smashing your sacred monument into 1,000 pieces at the bottom. Inclines would have required even more people, more ropes, and the ingenious use of ramps, perhaps built up from earth and stone, to gradually lift the stone. Declines would have needed ropes acting as brakes, slowly letting the sledge descend, a terrifying ballet of controlled chaos. One slip, one snapped rope, and your entire day's work, and potentially several lives, could be crushed in an instant. It's enough to make you appreciate your Amazon Prime delivery person, who only has to carry a box of socks. And then there's the quirky tidbit. Some researchers have pondered if these ancient builders used water or mud to reduce friction. Imagine the scene: a team of people not just pulling, but also sloshing water or thick mud under the sledge, creating a slick, slippery path. This is a technique known to have been used in other ancient cultures, like the Egyptians moving their colossal statues. It adds another layer of complexity. Now you're not just moving stone, you're also moving water or mud across a dry, dusty landscape. It's like trying to make a giant slip and slide for a rock. Sounds fun, doesn't it? Except the rock weighs 50 tons. The sheer rhythmic nature of the work must have been hypnotic. The synchronized grunts, the shouts of encouragement, perhaps even simple chants to keep everyone in time. Heave. Ho! Heave. Ho! You can almost hear it echoing across the ancient hills. Each step forward, measured in mere inches, was a triumph. Each day, a battle against gravity, friction, and exhaustion. You'd feel the raw bite of the rope against your hands, the dust caking your throat, the sun beating down on your back. It's a full-body workout that makes modern CrossFit look like a leisurely stroll through a park. Historians still argue whether these massive construction efforts were purely voluntary, driven by shared spiritual beliefs, or if there was some form of emerging social hierarchy that could compel such labor. Was it a communal endeavor born of deep faith, or were there early forms of coercion at play? The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere in between, a complex tapestry of devotion, necessity, and the nascent stirrings of organized society. What is clear is that this wasn't a casual weekend project. This was a sustained, generations-long commitment, requiring immense dedication from individuals who likely understood their efforts as profoundly sacred. Imagine the sense of accomplishment when a pillar finally arrived at its designated spot. Not just for the individual, but for the entire community. It wasn't just a stone, it was a promise, a connection to the unseen world, a testament to their collective will. And then, once it was there, the next challenge, raising it upright. But that, my friends, is a story for another time. For now, just let the image of hundreds of determined, dust-covered people, straining against ropes, inching a multi-ton stone across the ancient landscape, settle into your mind. It's a testament to what humanity can achieve when driven by a purpose far grander than mere survival. It's a truly monumental effort, literally. You stand there, the wind whispering secrets around the ancient stones, and a new question begins to hum in your mind, a truly monumental one. How did they do this? Not just the quarrying, not just the carving, not just the moving, but the sheer, mind-boggling act of getting hundreds, perhaps even thousands, of people to work together, consistently, for generations, on a project this enormous, this complex, this utterly unprecedented. Imagine trying to get a dozen friends to agree on a restaurant, let alone convince hundreds to spend years hauling rocks. Your weekly team meeting probably feels like a breeze by comparison. This wasn't a pharaoh barking orders from a golden throne. This wasn't a Roman emperor dispatching legions of engineers with meticulously drawn blueprints. You're looking at a time long before kings, before formal governments, before cities, and certainly long before anyone thought to invent a spreadsheet or a project management app. There was no central authority, no written language to issue commands, no police force to ensure compliance, no HR department to mediate disputes, no performance reviews, just shared purpose. Or maybe a really persuasive shaman with a great sense of humor. So, how did they coordinate this colossal effort? This is where the true genius, the almost unfathomable ingenuity of these ancient builders, truly comes into focus. We're talking about a level of social organization that completely rewrites our understanding of early human capabilities. For a long time, the mainstream historical fact was that large-scale, complex construction projects like this only became possible after the development of agriculture, sedentary lifestyles, and the emergence of hierarchical societies with specialized labor and centralized power structures. Göbekli Tepe utterly demolishes that assumption. It shows us that hunter-gatherers, supposedly simple and nomadic, were capable of sustained, complex, communal endeavors on an epic scale. It's like finding out your goldfish can solve advanced calculus. Picture the scene, a cacophony of sounds echoing across the Proto-Anatolian hills. The rhythmic thud-thud-thud of stone hammers chipping away at bedrock in a distant quarry. The scrape and grind of flint tools meticulously shaping the T-shaped pillars. The grunts and shouts of dozens, perhaps hundreds, of people straining together, pulling ropes made of animal hide, inching a colossal stone across the rugged landscape. The constant murmuring of conversations, the laughter, the occasional frustrated yell. And through it all, a sense of shared rhythm, a collective pulse. How did they decide who did what? Who was the master carver, and who was on rock-pushing duty for the day? It's unlikely there was a formal job interview process. Instead, archaeologists still grapple with the precise mechanisms of this coordination. Was it a form of emergent leadership, where particularly skilled or charismatic individuals naturally took on guiding roles? Perhaps a respected elder, or a particularly insightful shaman, whose wisdom and vision inspired the community? Or was it a more fluid, egalitarian system where tasks were distributed based on ability, willingness, and a deep understanding of the collective goal? One fascinating, if somewhat fringe, tidbit that sheds light on this comes from the archaeological evidence of massive feasting at Göbekli Tepe. We find enormous quantities of animal bones, particularly from wild gazelle and aurochs, extinct wild cattle, along with large stone troughs that could have been used for brewing early forms of beer or other fermented beverages. Some researchers propose that these grand communal feasts weren't just celebrations after the work was done, but were actually a crucial part of the incentive and bonding mechanism for the labor itself. Imagine it: you spend weeks, months, straining and sweating under the sun, moving a stone heavier than a small truck. Your reward isn't a paycheck, but a massive, joyous gathering where food is plentiful, drinks flow freely, and your efforts are recognized and celebrated by the entire community. It creates a powerful social glue, a reciprocal obligation, where contributing to the sacred site earns you a place at the most epic parties history has ever forgotten. Forget trust falls. Their team-building exercise was probably, let's lift this 20-ton pillar without crushing anyone. Talk about high stakes. This wasn't just about brute force, it was about ingenious logistics. Someone had to figure out the best routes to transport the stones. Someone had to organize the procurement of tools, the flint, the obsidian, the basalt, from distant sources. Someone had to ensure there was enough food and water for everyone involved, especially if people were traveling from afar to contribute. This implies a network of communication and cooperation that stretched far beyond the immediate construction site. Perhaps different hunter-gatherer bands or clans specialized in different tasks, or contributed labor during specific seasons. Maybe one group was renowned for their quarrying skills, another for their carving artistry, and yet another for their sheer strength in moving heavy loads. They would converge on Göbekli Tepe, not as chorus laborers, but as participants in a grand, shared spiritual project. Think about the daily rhythm. The sun rises, painting the hills in hues of gold and orange. The air is cool, crisp. You join your fellow builders, the dust already beginning to kick up as people move about. You might hear the rhythmic chanting that helps synchronize the pulling of ropes, a low, guttural sound that vibrates through the very ground beneath your feet. The smell of wood smoke from communal fires, where meals are being prepared, mingles with the scent of dry earth and sweat. There's a shared understanding, a nonverbal communication that comes from working side by side on a task that demands absolute unity. A nod, a grunt, a shared glance, these were their blueprints, their progress reports. The level of trust and mutual understanding required is astonishing. Imagine placing your life, quite literally, in the hands of your fellow workers as you manipulate these massive stones. One slip, one misjudgment, and the consequences could be fatal. This suggests a deeply cohesive society, where social bonds were incredibly strong, perhaps forged through generations of shared challenges and triumphs in the harsh, beautiful landscape. It wasn't just about building a temple, it was about building a community, reinforcing identities, and solidifying a shared cosmology. The precise nature of the social hierarchy, if any, remains a hotly debated topic among archaeologists. Was there a nascent priestly class emerging, guiding the vision and rituals? Were there big men, influential individuals who gained prestige through their ability to organize labor and host feasts, rather than through inherited power? Or was it truly a more communal, decentralized effort, driven by a profound, unifying belief system that transcended individual ambition? Göbekli Tepe challenges us to reconsider how human societies organize themselves, suggesting that monumental achievements don't always require the iron fist of a king, but can arise from the collective will and shared spiritual aspirations of a people. It's a testament to the power of belief, community, and perhaps, a really good party. You stand now, amidst these colossal T-shaped pillars, your gaze drawn away from the sheer engineering marvel of their placement, and instead, you begin to decipher the rich tapestry of animal symbols etched into their ancient stone. It's like stepping into the world's oldest, most enigmatic art gallery, only instead of hushed whispers and name tags, there's just a quiet hum of millennia, and a profound sense of, what on earth were they thinking? Run your hand gently over the cool, rough surface of one of the central monoliths in Enclosure D. You feel the deep grooves, the raised relief of a creature long gone from this immediate landscape. It's a scorpion, perhaps, its segmented tail poised, its pincers ready. Or maybe a snake coiling, writhing, its scales almost palpable beneath your fingertips. These aren't just crude etchings, they are masterful, dynamic representations, carved with a skill that belies the apparent simplicity of their tools. Imagine trying to sculpt a lifelike boar with a flint chisel and a hammerstone. You'd probably end up with something vaguely pig-shaped, or more likely, a broken chisel and a very sore thumb. Yet here, thousands of years ago, they managed to capture the very essence of these wild creatures. The sheer variety is astounding. You see fierce wild boars, their bristly backs and tusks rendered with startling realism. There are foxes, lithe and cunning, often depicted with their tails tucked, almost in a trot. Gazelles, too, though less common, suggest the prey animals that sustain these people. But it's the predators and the more unsettling creatures that truly dominate. Vultures, their wings spread wide, often headless or carrying something in their beaks. Spiders, their segmented bodies and multiple legs clearly visible. Lizards, dangerous felines that look like ancient leopards or lions, and of course, those ubiquitous snakes, sometimes seemingly intertwined, sometimes depicted in long, undulating lines across the stone. It's not exactly the kind of friendly, cuddly animal art you'd put in a nursery, is it? More like a "don't mess with nature" warning label for the entire planet. This prevalence of wild, often dangerous, animals, snakes, scorpions, boars, raptors, is a mainstream historical fact about Göbekli Tepe. Unlike later sites where domesticated animals might appear, here, you are firmly in the realm of the hunter-gatherer, where survival depended on understanding and respecting the power of the wild. These weren't pets, they were forces of nature, sources of both sustenance and peril, and clearly, profound spiritual significance. As you move from pillar to pillar, you start to notice patterns, arrangements that seem too deliberate to be random. Some pillars feature a single, dominant animal. Others are crowded with a veritable menagerie, a chaotic symphony of creatures. On the famous Vulture Stone, in Enclosure D, for instance, you find a complex tableau, a headless man, a scorpion, a vulture, and several other enigmatic symbols. There's even an H-shaped symbol and what some interpret as a totem pole of animals. This particular stone has ignited a fascinating, if somewhat quirky, fringe tidbit. Some researchers propose that the arrangement of these symbols isn't random at all, but rather a sophisticated depiction of constellations, potentially even recording a specific astronomical event, like a comet impact, around the time the site was built. Imagine a prehistoric star chart carved into a giant stone, meant to warn or commemorate a celestial cataclysm. It's a wild thought, isn't it? Makes you wonder if they had ancient astronomers who were just really good at carving. But what did it all mean? This is where the deciphering becomes less about identification and more about interpretation. Were these animals clan totems, representing different groups who gathered here? Were they spirit guides, deities, or perhaps symbols of powerful forces in their cosmology? Perhaps the dangerous creatures represented malevolent spirits, or challenges to be overcome, while the birds of prey were messengers to the heavens. You can almost feel the weight of their belief system pressing down on you. Historians still argue whether these intricate carvings serve purely symbolic functions, perhaps representing clan totems or mythological narratives, or if they were also practical, perhaps mapping celestial events or even territorial claims. There's no Rosetta Stone here, no ancient text to explain their pictographic language. You're left to piece together clues from the imagery itself, from the known behaviors of these animals, and from what little we understand of pre-agricultural belief systems. It's like trying to understand a very complicated movie plot just by looking at a few still frames. Consider the occasional, rare depiction of human-like figures. They are often less detailed than the animals, sometimes headless, or shown in submissive poses. This stark contrast suggests a hierarchy, a profound reverence for the animal world, perhaps even seeing animals as closer to the divine or as intermediaries between the human and spiritual realms. It's a world where the wild was not something to be tamed, but to be revered, feared, and perhaps communicated with. You can almost hear the ancient shamans whispering incantations, surrounded by these silent stone beasts, seeking wisdom or protection. The repetitive nature of some symbols, like the snakes, which appear on nearly every pillar, suggests a particularly significant role. Were they symbols of fertility, rebirth, danger, or perhaps even a cosmic river? The fact that some of the pillars themselves are anthropomorphic, T-shaped with subtle arm and hand reliefs, and sometimes even belts with animal depictions, further blurs the line between human and animal, suggesting a profound connection, perhaps even a transformation or shared essence. It's like they were saying, "We are part of this wild world, deeply, inextricably linked to its creatures." They certainly weren't setting up a petting zoo. This was a place of deep, primal connection to the forces of nature. The artistry itself speaks volumes about their dedication. These aren't quick sketches. They are deeply carved, often in high relief, requiring immense time and effort. This wasn't just decoration, it was an act of profound spiritual significance. Every chisel mark was a prayer, every polished surface a meditation. Imagine the conversations. "Okay, so for this pillar, I'm thinking more snakes. A lot more snakes. And maybe a really grumpy-looking boar. What do you think, Gary? Needs more scorpions, Dave. Definitely more scorpions." As you gaze at these ancient carvings, you start to feel the weight of their cosmology. This was a world alive with spirits, with powerful animal entities that governed their existence. Their entire worldview, their understanding of the cosmos, was likely filtered through the lens of these wild creatures. The temple itself, with its circular enclosures and central pillars, might have been designed to mimic a cosmic order, a sacred space where the boundaries between the human world and the animal spirit world were thin, permeable. So, as you step back, letting your eyes wander across the ancient bestiary carved into the stones of Göbekli Tepe, you're not just looking at art. You are glimpsing the very soul of a people from over 11,000 years ago. You are attempting to decode their dreams, their fears, their understanding of the universe. It's a silent, stony testament to a belief system so ancient, so foundational, that it still resonates, even in our noisy, modern world. And it leaves you with an unshakable feeling that these animal images weren't just pictures, they were portals. Now let your mind drift back again, not just to the dust and the stones, but to the living, breathing heart of Göbekli Tepe. Imagine, if you will, the profound silence of the pre-dawn, broken only by the distant call of a jackal or the rustle of dry grass in the wind. You stand at the entrance of one of those magnificent circular enclosures, the massive T-shaped pillars looming like ancient sentinels, their carved faces still shrouded in the dim light. This isn't just a collection of stones, this is a stage, waiting for a drama that played out thousands of years before the first cities, before writing, before even the wheel. As the sky begins to lighten, a hush falls over the gathering crowd. And yes, there would have been a crowd. Not just a handful of individuals, but perhaps dozens, even hundreds, drawn from scattered hunter-gatherer bands across the vast Anatolian landscape. Picture them, their faces etched with the lines of a hard, nomadic life, their eyes wide with anticipation. They arrive, not in a chaotic rush, but with a quiet reverence, perhaps carrying small offerings, a handful of wild grains, a perfectly shaped flint tool, a feather from a rare bird. You can almost smell the faint scent of wood smoke clinging to their simple animal hide garments, mingling with the earthy aroma of the damp ground and the sharp, clean air of the highlands. The light grows, and the intricate carvings on the pillars begin to reveal themselves. The fierce boar, the slithering snake, the watchful fox, the majestic crane, they seem to stir, coming alive in the flickering light of strategically placed fires. These weren't just pretty pictures, they were a language, a complex code understood by all present, speaking of shared myths, ancestral spirits, and the powerful forces of the natural world. You might notice the way some individuals gaze intently at a specific pillar, perhaps one depicting a creature they hold sacred, or one that represents their own particular clan. It's like their ancient version of a concert where everyone knows all the lyrics, even if those lyrics are etched in stone and sung in a language long forgotten. Then, the rituals begin. What exactly did they do? We don't have a playbook, no ancient Göbekli Tepe guide to sacred rites, unfortunately. But we can infer. Perhaps it started with a low, guttural chanting, a rhythmic sound that would vibrate through the very ground beneath your feet, resonating with the deep hum of human connection. Imagine the sound growing, swelling, filling the enclosed space, bouncing off the smooth surfaces of the megaliths. Maybe there were dances, not necessarily choreographed ballets, but spontaneous movements, trance-like swaying, or energetic stomping that echoed the movements of the animals they depicted. Perhaps they entered altered states of consciousness, not just through repetitive chanting or dance, but possibly through the consumption of specific plants. Though evidence for this is purely speculative, it's a quirky tidbit that sparks the imagination when considering ancient spiritual practices. You might see figures, perhaps elders or shamans, moving to the center of the enclosure, their movements deliberate and imbued with meaning. They might sprinkle water, or place offerings into shallow depressions in the stone floor. Think about the shared gaze, the collective focus on these central figures, or on the celestial bodies visible through the open roof of the enclosure. This was a communal experience, a powerful bonding agent that transcended the daily struggle for survival. It was how they connected to the cosmos, seeing themselves as part of a grand, interconnected tapestry of life, death, and rebirth. The animal symbols weren't just animals. They were constellations, spirits, guides, and perhaps even representations of the very forces that governed their existence. Consider the atmosphere, a mix of solemn reverence and ecstatic release. The flickering firelight would cast dancing shadows, making the carved beasts seem to move, to breathe. The air would thicken with the scent of burning herbs, perhaps dried juniper or wild thyme, adding another layer to the sensory experience. This wasn't a quick, pop in, say a prayer, pop out kind of event. These rituals could have lasted for hours, even days, punctuated by communal feasting. Archaeologists have found evidence of massive feasting events, including huge quantities of animal bones, gazelle, wild sheep, and aurochs, suggesting that these gatherings were also important social occasions, reinforcing alliances and distributing resources. It was probably the ancient equivalent of a massive potluck, but with way more spiritual significance and significantly less Tupperware. The T-pillars themselves, with their minimal, stylized human-like forms, would have served as mute witnesses, perhaps even as participants, embodying ancestral spirits or deities. You could almost feel their silent presence, absorbing the energy of the rituals, holding the collective memory of generations. The very act of gathering, of moving these colossal stones, of carving these intricate symbols, was in itself a ritual, a profound act of shared belief and purpose that solidified their nascent social structures. This wasn't just about worship, it was about defining who they were, together, in a world that was still wild and untamed. It was a place where stories were told, traditions passed down, and a shared identity was forged, long before anyone thought of writing it all down. And as the sun climbed higher, flooding the enclosure with its golden light, the intensity might have shifted. Perhaps the chanting softened, giving way to quiet contemplation or shared meals. You might see individuals touching the carved stones, feeling the cool, smooth surface, connecting physically with the ancient artistry and the collective effort it represented. The very act of being there, shoulder to shoulder with people from different bands, all united by a common purpose, would have been transformative. It was their earliest form of social networking, without the Wi-Fi, but with much better stone carvings. One mainstream historical fact about Göbekli Tepe is that the monumental structures, built by hunter-gatherers, demonstrate a level of social organization and symbolic thought previously thought to have emerged only after the development of agriculture and settled life. The existence of these complex ritual spaces completely upended the traditional narrative of human civilization. It forced us to reconsider, did settlement lead to monumental architecture, or did the desire for monumental architecture and shared ritual spaces actually spur the development of settlement and agriculture? This is where the open scholarly debate phrase comes in. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were primarily for spiritual enlightenment and cosmic connection, or if they served equally vital practical purposes, such as facilitating trade, resolving disputes between nomadic groups, or even coordinating large-scale hunts. It's hard to untangle the sacred from the practical when you're dealing with a world so fundamentally different from our own. But whatever the primary driver, the outcome was profound. As the day waned, and the shadows lengthened once more, the participants would eventually disperse, returning to their nomadic lives, but carrying with them the indelible imprint of what they had experienced. They would take back not just memories, but renewed communal bonds, shared understandings of their place in the cosmos, and perhaps even new insights into the patterns of the stars or the movements of the animals. These rituals, unfolding within those circular spaces, were the beating heart of Göbekli Tepe, connecting early humans to the vast, mysterious cosmos above them, and forging unbreakable bonds with each other here on Earth. It was a profound, silent language spoken across millennia, a whispered secret shared only with the stars and the wind. Now, gently, let your mind drift forward, not just through days or weeks, but through centuries. Imagine the sun rising and setting, not just a few hundred times, but tens of thousands of times over this sacred hill. Because Göbekli Tepe was not a single, grand project, completed in a flurry of activity and then left to the winds. Oh no. This was a slow, deliberate, multi-generational undertaking, a living, breathing monument that evolved and changed with the very people who built it. You see, the history of Göbekli Tepe isn't just about what was built, but how it was built, and how it was rebuilt, over and over again. When archaeologists first pieced together the story of the site, they didn't just find one layer of construction, like a perfectly preserved cake. Instead, they found a bewildering, fascinating lasagna of time. Below the earliest, most famous enclosures, those grand, colossal circles we've been picturing, like Enclosure D with its majestic central pillars, lay even older, smaller, and perhaps even more enigmatic structures. And above them? Layers upon layers of later, subtly different, and often less monumental constructions. It's as if the builders of Göbekli Tepe had a subscription model for sacred architecture, new release every few centuries, with some minor tweaks and a fresh coat of metaphorical paint. You might think of it like a family home that gets added to, renovated, and redecorated over generations. Great-grandpa builds the original sturdy log cabin. Grandpa adds a sunroom and maybe a second story. Dad puts in a modern kitchen and a new roof. And then you come along and decide to knock down a wall to make an open-plan living space. But at Göbekli Tepe, these renovations often involve the rather dramatic step of completely burying the previous room before building a new one on top. It's a bit like deciding your old kitchen is so last century that you just fill it with dirt and build a brand new, slightly smaller kitchen directly over it. A very permanent kind of renovation, wouldn't you say? This isn't just a quirky architectural choice. It speaks to an incredible continuity of purpose, but also a fascinating evolution of thought. The earliest structures, dating back to what archaeologists call Layer 3, because, they start from the top and count down, which makes perfect sense once you get used to it, or maybe it doesn't, just go with it, are the largest and most impressive. These are the famous T-shaped pillars, often weighing 10 to 20 tons, arranged in those iconic circles. They represent the pinnacle of early Göbekli Tepe construction. The carvings on these early pillars are also incredibly detailed and vivid, those foxes, boars, snakes, and vultures that seem to leap out of the stone. But as you move up through the archaeological layers through time, you start to notice a subtle shift. The later enclosures, found in what's known as Layer 2, are generally smaller. Their T-shaped pillars, while still impressive, are not quite as gigantic. The carvings, while still present, might be less numerous or less intricately detailed. It's as if the initial burst of monumental genius slowly, gradually, began to wane, or perhaps, shifted its focus. Maybe the later generations were less obsessed with size and more with symbolism, or perhaps their resources, or even their societal structures, had changed. It's like comparing a blockbuster epic film to a more intimate, indie production that came out a few years later. Both are art, but the scale is different. And here's where the mystery deepens. These later builders didn't just build next to the older structures. They often built on top of them. This wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate, incredibly laborious act of burial. Imagine the sheer effort involved. You've just spent centuries, perhaps, building these magnificent stone circles, carefully quarrying, carving, and erecting these massive pillars. Then, a few generations later, someone decides, "You know what? This is great, but we need something new. Let's fill this entire sacred space with tons of dirt and rubble, and then we'll build a slightly different, slightly smaller one on top." It's the ultimate out with the old, in with the slightly less old but still pretty old mentality. This practice of deliberate backfilling and subsequent rebuilding is a mainstream historical fact that completely reshaped our understanding of the site. It wasn't just abandoned and then rediscovered. It was intentionally interred, sometimes multiple times. This cyclical pattern of construction, use, and burial suggests a profound ritualistic meaning. It wasn't simply about maintenance. It was about renewal, about closing off one sacred phase to begin another. Think of it like a spiritual spring cleaning, but instead of dusting, you're moving mountains of earth. One quirky or fringe tidbit that emerges from this cyclical building is the sheer volume of filled material. Archaeologists estimate that hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of earth, stone chippings, and rubble were used over the centuries to meticulously bury these structures. Where did all this material come from? Was it conveniently located nearby, or did they have to haul it from afar? It speaks to an incredible, sustained communal effort, far beyond what we might expect from nomadic hunter-gatherers. It wasn't just a few people with shovels. It was a society organized to move earth. Historians still argue whether the burying of earlier structures was an act of reverence, a practical necessity for new construction, or perhaps even a deliberate reset of sacred space, a way to ritually conclude a cycle before beginning anew. Was it about protecting the old from defilement, or about creating a clean slate for the new? Perhaps it was a combination of all these things, a complex interplay of practicality and profound spiritual belief. Maybe they believed that by burying the old, they were empowering the new, drawing strength from the ancestors beneath their feet. Imagine the knowledge that must have been passed down through these generations. Not just the technical skills of quarrying and carving, but the rituals, the stories, the cosmological understanding that underpinned it all. Grandparents teaching grandchildren how to select the right stone, how to chip away at its surface, how to move it with nothing but muscle and ingenuity. Each generation building upon the legacy of the last, sometimes literally. It's a testament to the enduring power of tradition, even as that tradition subtly transforms. You can almost hear the echoes of their efforts, the rhythmic chipping of flint tools against limestone, the grunts and shouts of men pulling ropes, the rumble of multi-ton stones slowly inching into place. Then, centuries later, the steady scoop and pour of earth, burying those very stones, preparing the ground for the next iteration. It was a continuous, evolving conversation with the land, with the cosmos, and with the past itself. The builders of Göbekli Tepe weren't just creating monuments. They were creating a living history, layer by painstaking layer. And in doing so, they left us a puzzle written in stone and soil, challenging us to decipher the silent whispers of their enduring faith across the millennia. You've witnessed, in your mind's eye, the colossal undertaking of Göbekli Tepe's construction, generation after generation adding their mark, their sweat, their dreams to these sacred hills. You've seen the T-pillars rise, the animal spirits gaze out from ancient stone, the circles hum with untold rituals. But now you arrive at perhaps the most profound and perplexing chapter in its long, mysterious story, the Great Backfill. Imagine, if you will, the site around 8200 BC. The structures have stood for centuries, perhaps a millennium or more. They've been built upon, modified, reimagined. The air has hummed with the chants of shamans, the rhythmic thud of stone on stone, the murmur of countless feet. Then, a silence begins to descend. Not the silence of abandonment, but the silence of a new, deliberate, and truly monumental task. Instead of simply walking away, leaving the magnificent T-pillars exposed to the elements, these ancient people began to bury them. Not haphazardly, not as if fleeing in a panic, but with an astonishing level of care and intention. You picture them, not with bulldozers, of course, but with baskets, with hides, with their bare hands, moving earth, stone, and debris, meticulously filling the circular enclosures, one scoop, one basket at a time. It's a reverse engineering of creation, a slow, patient undoing of their ancestors' monumental efforts. You can almost feel the grit of the dirt under your fingernails, the ache in your back, as you join them in this strange, colossal burial. Think of the sheer scale of this endeavor. We're not talking about burying a small hut or a single grave. We're talking about entire complexes, massive stone pillars standing meters high, all being systematically covered. It's like deciding to bury your entire house, basement to attic, with shovels and buckets, just because. You wonder, perhaps with a gentle, sleepy chuckle, if anyone ever tried to suggest they just, stop building and go home. No, Brenda, we're not done yet. We have to bury it all first. The effort involved must have rivaled the original construction. It speaks volumes about their organizational capabilities, even in this act of unbuilding. This wasn't a natural process. This wasn't a landslide or a flood that slowly engulfed the site. Archaeological evidence clearly shows that the fill material, a mixture of rubble, soil, flint shards, bone fragments, and even discarded tools, was deliberately brought in and compacted. It was a planned, multi-generational project of interment. You watch as the lower parts of the T-pillars disappear, then the sculpted animal reliefs, until finally, the tops of the tallest stones are gone, swallowed by the earth. It's a slow-motion burial, a deliberate act of entombment. Why? This is the question that echoes through the empty spaces where Göbekli Tepe once stood proud. Why would a community, or a series of communities, dedicate so much energy to building something so profound, only to then dedicate an equally vast amount of energy to burying it? It's like building the most magnificent sandcastle on the beach, then meticulously covering it with more sand, making sure no one ever sees it again. It defies conventional logic. One prominent theory, and a mainstream historical fact, is that the burial was a ritualistic act. Imagine that these ancient people viewed the structures not just as buildings, but as living entities, sacred beings that had served their purpose. Perhaps, after centuries of use, the temples had fulfilled their spiritual destiny, or perhaps their power needed to be contained, to be returned to the earth from whence the stones came. It's a concept found in many later cultures, the idea of ritually killing or burying sacred objects that are no longer in use, or that have become too powerful to remain exposed. You can almost hear the low, mournful chants accompanying the rhythmic thud of dirt being compacted. Another idea, a more quirky or fringe tidbit, suggests that the burial was an act of preservation, a way to protect the site from an impending cataclysm or from potential desecration by future generations who might not understand its true significance. Perhaps they foresaw a shift in the world, a changing climate, or a new way of life that would render their sacred spaces obsolete, and they wanted to ensure their legacy was not destroyed, but merely hidden, waiting for a time when it might be rediscovered. It's a bit like putting your most cherished family heirlooms in a very, very deep safety deposit box, then forgetting to tell anyone where the key is. Then there's the possibility of a profound ideological shift. As agricultural practices slowly began to take hold in the region, perhaps the nomadic hunter-gatherer way of life, and the belief systems that underpinned it, started to wane. Göbekli Tepe, a monumental testament to that earlier way of life, may have become obsolete, its purpose no longer resonating with a society moving towards settled villages and farming. The burial, in this context, could be seen as a grand farewell, a respectful closing of a chapter, rather than a harsh abandonment. It's a bit like when you finally decide to retire your favorite, but now hopelessly outdated, flip phone. You don't just throw it away, you give it a little nod of respect before putting it in the old tech drawer. Archaeologists widely debate whether the backfill was a single, continuous event or a series of intermittent burials over time. Some evidence suggests that different enclosures were buried at different periods, implying a more gradual process, perhaps tied to specific ritual cycles or changes in the community's spiritual focus. This isn't a simple, lights out, everyone go home scenario. It's a complex, drawn-out process that reflects deep-seated beliefs and a profound connection to the land and the cosmos. Consider the implications of this act. If Göbekli Tepe was indeed a central gathering place, a spiritual beacon for dispersed hunter-gatherer groups, its deliberate burial marks a pivotal moment. It signals an end, not just to a phase of construction, but possibly to an entire epoch of human spiritual life in this region. The energy that had been poured into its creation was now poured into its concealment. It's a testament to the power of ritual and the profound respect these people had for their sacred spaces, even in their retirement. You imagine the generations involved in this immense task. Grandparents who helped build the pillars, now watching their grandchildren meticulously shovel dirt back over them. The knowledge of why this was being done must have been passed down, a secret shared, a communal understanding that this monumental act was necessary. There's a quiet dignity in it, a sense of purpose even in the act of erasing. It's not a defeat, it's a completion. The scale of the backfill also provides a unique challenge for modern archaeology. Because the site was so thoroughly buried, much of it was preserved in a remarkably pristine state, shielded from erosion and human disturbance for millennia. This deliberate act of concealment is why we can now, 11,000 years later, uncover its secrets with such detail. In a strange twist of fate, their act of burial became our act of preservation. It's almost as if they left a giant, very dusty time capsule for us to find, albeit without a helpful "open in 11,000 years" label. As you reflect on the great backfill mystery, you realize it's not just a puzzle about ancient engineering or belief systems. It's a profound statement about humanity's relationship with its creations. These people didn't just abandon their past, they ritually honored it, laid it to rest, and perhaps, in doing so, made space for something new to emerge. It's a reminder that even the most monumental achievements can have a finite lifespan, and that sometimes, the most powerful act is not to build, but to respectfully let go. Now, close your eyes, or just let them softly unfocus, as we step back in time, not just to observe Göbekli Tepe from a distance, but to live within its ancient rhythm. Imagine, if you will, what daily life might have truly been like for those remarkable individuals who dedicated their existence, perhaps not every single day, but certainly a significant portion of their lives, to building this astonishing, sacred place. You're not just an observer anymore, you are one of them, a hunter-gatherer with calloused hands and a spirit stirred by something profound. The sun begins its slow ascent over the Anatolian hills, painting the sky in hues of soft orange and dusty rose. You stir on your bed of animal hides, the cool morning air a gentle kiss on your skin. Around you, the murmur of a waking camp begins. There are no alarm clocks here, no blaring news channels, just the growing chorus of birds and the rustle of your fellow builders. Your shelter is simple, perhaps a lean-to constructed from branches and animal skins, or a more permanent, but still rudimentary, hut. Comfort is secondary to utility, a mere footnote in a life defined by purpose. Breakfast isn't a gourmet affair, certainly no avocado toast or artisanal coffee. Instead, you might chew on dried wild figs, a handful of gathered nuts, or perhaps a morsel of leftover roasted gazelle from last night's communal feast. Water, precious and life-giving, is drawn from a nearby spring, cool and pure. You're fueled by the land, by the bounty of a world still untamed by human hands, and remarkably you thrive. This isn't a life of scarcity, but one of careful, respectful coexistence with nature. As the light strengthens, the work begins. You pick up your tools, heavy, unyielding pieces of chert, flint, and basalt, sharpened through painstaking effort. There's no sophisticated iron or bronze here. These are the tools of the Stone Age, raw and honest. Your muscles, honed by a lifetime of hunting and gathering, are ready for the day's monumental task. Perhaps you're part of a team at the quarry, chipping away at the bedrock, slowly, methodically, freeing the massive T-shaped pillars from their stony embrace. The sound is a rhythmic thwack, 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 echoing across the landscape, a percussive symphony of human endeavor. It's hard, relentless work, each strike sending vibrations up your arm, dust clinging to your sweat-dampened skin. You might wonder if, after a particularly stubborn bit of rock, your ancestors ever thought, maybe we should just build a really big cairn instead? But the vision, the drive, keeps you going. Or maybe you're on the carving team, transforming a roughly hewn pillar into a masterpiece of ancient art. With smaller, finer tools, you meticulously etch the image of a fox, a snake, a wild boar, or a strange, stylized human figure into the stone. Every line, every curve, is a testament to skill and patience. You learn from elders, from watching, from doing. There are no blueprints, no instruction manuals, just shared knowledge passed down through generations. It's a bit like trying to build a Lego castle without the instructions, except the Legos weigh 10 to 20 tons each. Then there's the transportation. Imagine the sheer, brute force required. You're one of dozens, perhaps hundreds, of people, straining against thick ropes made from animal sinew or woven plant fibers. The colossal stone pillar, cradled on a bed of logs, moves inches at a time, groaning, scraping, as you pull it across uneven terrain. Each step is a struggle, a testament to collective will. Someone calls out a chant, a rhythm to synchronize your efforts, and you pull, muscles burning, sweat stinging your eyes. There's no heavy machinery, no cranes, just human grit and ingenuity. This isn't just a gym workout, this is the original powerlifting, where the weights were carved out of the earth itself. The question of how these communities organize such immense projects without a centralized authority, without a king or a hierarchical system, is fascinating. There's no evidence of a ruling class, no palaces, no grand tombs of leaders. Instead, archaeologists posit that these were cooperative endeavors, driven by shared spiritual beliefs and a sense of communal purpose. Perhaps different clans or family groups specialized in different tasks, some quarrying, some carving, some transporting. They would gather, work, celebrate, and then disperse, returning to their individual hunting grounds, only to reconvene for the next phase of construction. It's a bit like a massive, ancient barn raising, but instead of a barn, you're building the world's first cathedral. Life wasn't all work, of course. Evenings would bring a different kind of rhythm. After the sun dips below the horizon, casting long, purple shadows, the camp comes alive with the crackle of fires. The air fills with the aroma of roasting meat, perhaps wild cattle, gazelle, or even birds. Evidence from the site, including vast quantities of animal bones, confirms that these people were expert hunters, providing sustenance for large gatherings. This mainstream historical fact highlights their incredible resourcefulness. You share stories, myths, and legends around the flickering flames. Perhaps there's music, simple flutes made from bone, rhythmic drumming, or communal singing. These aren't just work breaks. These are moments of connection, of reinforcing the bonds that hold this extraordinary community together. You might engage in rituals within the unfinished enclosures, even as construction continues. The T-pillars, with their enigmatic carvings, are not just stones, they are living presences, imbued with meaning. Perhaps you witness ceremonies to honor the animals depicted, or to connect with the unseen forces of the cosmos. The purpose of Göbekli Tepe was deeply spiritual, a place where the veil between the mundane and the sacred was thin. It was a place for communal feasting, for sharing stories and beliefs, and for reinforcing the shared cosmology that bound these disparate groups together. This was their temple, their university, their community center, all rolled into one gigantic, meticulously carved stone package. But life was also fraught with challenges. Injuries from falling stones or errant tools were likely common. Disease, without modern medicine, could sweep through a camp. The weather, from blistering summer heat to biting winter winds, would have been a constant factor. Yet they persisted. They learned to adapt, to innovate, to endure. One quirky or fringe tidbit that often sparks debate is the idea that some of the animal carvings, particularly the vultures, might represent sky burials or a form of excarnation, where bodies were left to be consumed by scavengers before bones were collected. While not definitively proven for Göbekli Tepe itself, similar practices are known from other early sites in the region, offering a glimpse into their unique beliefs about death and the afterlife. It's a stark reminder that their worldview was vastly different from our own, perhaps seeing the cycle of life and death as a seamless continuum. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were not yet farmers in the traditional sense, but their very presence at this site might have been a catalyst for agriculture. The need to feed large gatherings of people for extended periods could have pushed them towards experimenting with cultivating wild cereals, which were abundant in the region. This is a fascinating aspect of the ongoing scholarly debate. Did the temple precede agriculture, Or did early forms of agriculture enable the temple? Historians still argue whether the monumental efforts at Göbekli Tepe created the conditions that necessitated more settled, agricultural lifestyles, effectively putting the cart before the horse, or rather, the temple before the plow. You live a life deeply intertwined with the natural world, understanding its rhythms, its dangers, and its gifts. Your senses are heightened: the scent of damp earth after a rain, the distant cry of a jackal, the feel of rough stone beneath your fingers. There's a profound connection to the landscape, a sense of belonging that many of us in our modern, disconnected lives can only dream of. As the sun sets, casting long shadows across the partially completed enclosures, you gather with your community once more. The air is cooler now, and the stars, undimmed by city lights, begin to prick the velvet blackness of the night sky. You look up, perhaps tracing the familiar constellations, feeling a sense of awe at the vastness of the cosmos, and a deep satisfaction in the knowledge that you are part of something truly extraordinary, something that transcends your individual life. You are building not just a temple of stone, but a foundation for the future of humanity. You stand there, a silent observer in the dust of ages, not just looking at stones, but feeling the very bedrock of human understanding shift beneath your feet. For centuries, our story, the grand narrative of how we got from spear-chucking nomads to spreadsheet-juggling city dwellers, felt pretty straightforward. It was a neat, linear progression. First came agriculture, the taming of wild grains and beasts, because, let's face it, nobody wants to chase a gazelle when you can just grow a barley field. Then came the settlements, the villages, because you needed to stay put to tend those fields. After that, the population grew, society got more complex, specialization kicked in, and finally, you got your grand temples, your monumental structures, your big important buildings. It was a logical, almost inevitable march towards civilization, a story we've taught in schools for generations. It felt comfortable, predictable, like a well-worn path in a history book. But then, you look at Göbekli Tepe, and suddenly, that well-worn path feels less like a path and more like a cliff edge. Because Göbekli Tepe doesn't just challenge that story, it flips the entire textbook upside down and shakes out all the neatly arranged chapters. It's like discovering that the final boss of a video game was actually living in the tutorial level all along. You realize that everything you thought you knew about the origins of civilization, about what makes us us, might just be wrong. Or at least, wildly incomplete. Imagine the absolute shock that rippled through the archaeological world when the true age and complexity of this place became undeniable. It was like finding a fully functional smartphone in a Roman ruin. Wait, what? How? That's not supposed to be there. The mainstream historical fact, the one etched into every introductory anthropology course, stated unequivocally that large-scale, permanent settlements and complex social structures required agriculture. You needed a food surplus to free up people from constant foraging, to allow for specialized labor like stone carving and monumental construction. But here, over 11,000 years ago, you have a monumental, sophisticated temple complex built by people who were, by all accounts, still hunter-gatherers. They hadn't yet fully embraced farming. They were still roaming, still gathering, still hunting. And yet they built this. It forces you to ask, what was the motivation? What kind of society, without the supposed stability and surplus of agriculture, could organize hundreds, perhaps thousands, of individuals to quarry, carve, transport, and erect these multi-ton pillars, not just once, but over many centuries? The traditional explanation that monumental architecture is a result of settled, agricultural life, crumbles into dust here. Göbekli Tepe suggests the opposite. Perhaps the need to build this monument, this sacred gathering place, was the very thing that drove people towards more settled behaviors, perhaps even towards agriculture. Maybe they started cultivating wild grains more intensively, not primarily for daily sustenance, but to feed the massive workforce required for construction, or for the grand feasts that would have accompanied these communal building efforts and rituals. Think about it, you're a hunter-gatherer, living a relatively mobile life, following the seasons and the herds. Life is tough, yes, but also free. What compels you to suddenly dedicate generations of your collective energy to moving enormous stones? It wasn't about building a granary or a defensive wall. It was something else entirely. It was, seemingly, about belief. About connecting with the cosmos. About community. This isn't just a temple, it's a profound statement about the human spirit's capacity for abstract thought, for collective endeavor driven by something far beyond mere survival. It tells you that our ancestors weren't just grunting, spear-wielding cave dwellers. They were philosophers, astronomers, artists, and deeply spiritual beings capable of organizing on a scale we previously attributed only to much later, civilized societies. They were, in essence, flexing on future generations, saying, "Oh, you think you invented complex society? Hold my beer, or rather, my fermented wild barley." The implications are staggering. It suggests that the impulse for religious or spiritual gathering, for shared ritual, might have been the catalyst for civilization, not its byproduct. People gathered for spiritual reasons, they built this incredible place, and the very act of building and maintaining it required them to innovate, to cooperate on an unprecedented scale, and perhaps, to find new ways to secure food resources to support their grand projects. This is where the quirky or fringe tidbit comes in. Some scholars have even mused if Göbekli Tepe, located in the Fertile Crescent, could be linked to the mythical Garden of Eden, a place of spiritual significance that might have predated the agricultural revolution and served as a cradle for early human spiritual awakening, before the fall into laborious farming. While purely speculative, it highlights the profound, almost mythical weight this site carries in our understanding of human origins. This completely rewrites the script. Instead of agriculture leads to civilization, it might be shared belief leads to monumental construction, which then necessitates agricultural innovation, which then leads to civilization. It's a subtle but monumental shift in perspective. It means that the very first stirrings of what we call civilization weren't necessarily about practical survival or economic efficiency, but about something far more profound, our innate desire to connect, to understand our place in the universe, and to express that understanding through collective effort. It means that the roots of our complex societies might be spiritual, not purely utilitarian. You realize that the long-held assumption that hunter-gatherers lived a precarious, hand-to-mouth existence, with no time for such grand projects, is shattered. Göbekli Tepe demonstrates that these people had not only the ingenuity but also the social cohesion and perhaps even the leisure time, or at least, the ability to prioritize non-subsistence activities, to undertake such an immense, multi-generational endeavor. They were not just surviving, they were thriving in ways we are only just beginning to comprehend. They had a sophisticated understanding of their world, a complex cosmology that demanded physical manifestation in stone. This site also challenges the idea of a single birthplace of civilization. Instead, it suggests a more distributed, perhaps even competitive, emergence of complex behaviors. Göbekli Tepe wasn't an isolated anomaly. It was the grandest and earliest example of a trend, a spark that ignited similar, though smaller, projects in the region. It forces us to reconsider the human capacity for innovation and organization in the Neolithic period. We often look back at ancient peoples through the lens of our own technological advancement, assuming they were simple. Göbekli Tepe stands as a monumental rebuke to that condescending view. These people were complex, sophisticated, and driven by powerful, abstract ideas. They were, in many ways, just like us, only with fewer power tools and a lot more upper body strength. Of course, historians still argue whether Göbekli Tepe was the cause of the agricultural revolution, or merely an incredibly sophisticated expression of a society on the very cusp of it, a society whose unique environmental circumstances, abundant wild grains and game, allowed for such monumental undertakings even without full domestication. Was it the spark, or the grand finale of a hunter-gatherer golden age? The debate continues, swirling around the silent, watchful T-pillars. But regardless of the precise causal link, its existence undeniably rewrites the linear narrative, presenting a far richer, more complex, and frankly, more awe-inspiring picture of our earliest ancestors. It challenges us to imagine a world where spiritual ambition, rather than just the grumble of an empty stomach, could be the primary engine of human progress. So, you've seen Göbekli Tepe rise and fall, a monumental effort then mysteriously buried. But did the ideas, the sheer audacious spirit of this place, just vanish with its burial? Oh, absolutely not. Think of it like a really catchy tune that gets stuck in your head and then, suddenly, everyone's humming a slightly different version of it. The melody of Göbekli Tepe, its core concepts, echoed across the landscape of ancient Anatolia, morphing and adapting into a symphony of smaller, yet equally fascinating, sights. Imagine, if you will, the ripple effect. Göbekli Tepe was the stone dropped into the calm pond of hunter-gatherer life. The concentric circles, the T-shaped pillars, the deeply carved animal imagery, these weren't just architectural quirks. They were a profound statement, a shared language of belief. And as people moved, as communities interacted, those ideas, like ancient memes, spread. You start to see smaller, often more domestic-looking, sites emerge that nevertheless bear an unmistakable family resemblance to our grand, mysterious temple. Let's journey a mere 50 kilometers or so north of Göbekli Tepe, to a place called Novali Kori. Now, before you pack your imaginary bags, you should know that Novali Kori is currently, shall we say, aquatic. It was submerged by the waters of the Ataturk Dam in the late 1990s, a bittersweet fate for an archaeological treasure. But before it became a prehistoric Atlantis, excavations revealed something remarkable: smaller, yet undeniably present, T-shaped pillars. These weren't the colossal, awe-inspiring giants of Göbekli Tepe, mind you. They were more modest, often found integrated into rectangular, multi-roomed buildings that appeared to be houses. You can almost hear the ancient architects saying, "Okay, so we can't do the whole massive open-air temple thing every day, but we can definitely incorporate a little bit of that sacred vibe into our living rooms." It's like downsizing from a mansion to a chic townhouse, but still insisting on that one quirky design feature you loved. At Novali Kori, you discover that the T-pillars are still there, yes, but they're often slimmer, less imposing, and sometimes even have carved faces, almost like anthropomorphic guardians peering out from the walls. The animal carvings are also present, but perhaps a bit more integrated into the domestic space, less overtly monumental. This suggests a fascinating evolution. The sacred wasn't confined to a grand, remote sanctuary anymore. It was being brought closer to home, woven into the fabric of daily life. The communal, monumental ritual space of Göbekli Tepe seems to have decentralized, with elements of its spiritual architecture appearing in what look like early village settings. It's a mainstream historical fact that Novali Kori provides crucial evidence for the transition from purely hunter-gatherer societies to more settled communities, demonstrating how elements of Göbekli Tepe's spiritual legacy adapted to this changing lifestyle. Then, just when you think you've got a handle on things, you turn your gaze southwest, to another site that has recently been blowing archaeologists' minds: Karahan Tepe. If Göbekli Tepe was the elder statesman, Karahan Tepe is its slightly younger, equally enigmatic sibling, perhaps even more sprawling in its full extent. Discovered in the 1990s but only extensively excavated more recently, Karahan Tepe is often referred to as Göbekli Tepe's sister site, for good reason. You walk among its ruins, and the déjà vu is palpable. There are the unmistakable T-shaped pillars, not quite as perfectly formed as Göbekli Tepe's, perhaps, but certainly cut from the same spiritual cloth. Many are still embedded in the bedrock, waiting to be fully unearthed. But Karahan Tepe also offers its own unique twists. While Göbekli Tepe is famous for its animal reliefs, Karahan Tepe introduces a new, somewhat unsettling, element: human figures. You encounter a truly striking, almost grotesque, carving of a human head, complete with a snake emerging from its mouth, or perhaps an elongated tongue. And in one particularly famous chamber, you find a series of phallus-shaped pillars, some with carved faces, arranged around a central, basin-like depression. It's a slightly more overt, perhaps even a bit raunchy, expression of ancient spirituality. You get the sense that while the core ideas were shared, each community put its own unique spin on the sacred, adding local flavor to the cosmic recipe. It's like comparing two bands from the same genre. They share influences, but one might have a slightly heavier base line, or a penchant for pyrotechnics. The sheer scale of Karahan Tepe is also something to behold. While Göbekli Tepe has multiple enclosures, Karahan Tepe appears to have an even greater number, some still buried, extending over a vast area. This raises a fascinating question: were these sites part of a larger, interconnected network? Was there a pre-pottery Neolithic temple circuit that early tourists could visit, maybe with a punch card for free cave drawings? Archaeologists still debate whether these sites represent a single, cohesive religious movement that spread, or if they were independent developments inspired by a common set of emerging spiritual needs, perhaps like separate startups all trying to solve the same existential problem. The presence of so many similar, yet distinct, sites strongly suggests a shared cultural horizon across southeastern Anatolia during this period. And then there's Sayburk, another recent discovery, which features a remarkable, deeply carved relief of a human figure grappling with two animals, a leopard and a bull. It's an incredibly dynamic piece of art, showcasing the continued importance of animal symbolism but also introducing more complex narrative elements. You see the mastery of stone carving continuing, perhaps even evolving in its storytelling capabilities. These later sites aren't just echo chambers, they're laboratories where the initial ideas from Göbekli Tepe were experimented with, refined, and sometimes reinterpreted. What you observe across these sites is a fascinating trajectory. The monumental, purely ceremonial focus of Göbekli Tepe, a place built by hunter-gatherers, for hunter-gatherers, seems to gradually give way to a more integrated existence. At sites like Keonu, which is slightly later than Göbekli Tepe and Navali Kori, you start to see very clear evidence of early agriculture and settled village life. While Keonu doesn't have the T-pillars, it does have large communal buildings, often with polished floors and intricate stonework, suggesting that the spirit of collective effort and shared ritual space persisted, even as the specific architectural forms changed. It's a mainstream historical fact that Keonu is one of the earliest sites to show clear evidence of domesticated plants and animals, marking a pivotal step towards the Neolithic Revolution. Think of it this way: Göbekli Tepe was the grand, awe-inspiring cathedral built by a nomadic people. As those people started to settle down, as they began to farm and live in permanent villages, the need for a massive, dedicated pilgrimage site might have lessened. Instead, elements of the sacred were incorporated into their homes, their communal halls, and their daily lives. The energy shifted from building a single, monumental center to creating a network of smaller, more localized sacred spaces, perhaps reflecting a more distributed spiritual authority, or simply a more practical approach to worship when you've got crops to tend and children to raise. It's like going from attending huge rock concerts to hosting acoustic jam sessions in your living room. Different scale, same passion. The animal iconography also evolves. While the snakes, wild boars, and foxes of Göbekli Tepe are dominant, at later sites you might see more depictions of aurochs, wild cattle, and sheep, perhaps reflecting their growing importance as domesticated animals or sources of sustenance. The world was changing, and the art was changing with it, mirroring humanity's shifting relationship with the natural world. From venerating wild beasts to managing them, the ancient human mind was adapting, and its sacred expressions followed suit. So, while Göbekli Tepe might have been intentionally buried, its spirit wasn't interred with it. Instead, it seems to have diffused, spreading its influence like ripples across the ancient landscape. You see the echoes in the smaller T-pillars, the evolving animal art, the continued communal efforts, and the very idea of monumental construction for non-utilitarian purposes. These later sites demonstrate that Göbekli Tepe wasn't an isolated anomaly, a flash in the pan of prehistory. It was the radiant core of an entire cultural movement, a foundational moment that set in motion a profound transformation in human society, a transformation that would ultimately lead us to the world we inhabit today. The mystery of its construction might be unparalleled, but the legacy of its ideas is clearly visible in the scattered, smaller, yet equally compelling, whispers of its descendants. You've always been told a story, haven't you? The grand narrative of human progress, neatly packaged and delivered. It usually goes something like this: early humans, clever and resourceful, discover agriculture. They figure out how to plant seeds, cultivate crops, and tame animals. And with a reliable food source, they no longer have to chase their dinner across vast plains. They settle down. They build villages. These villages grow into towns, then cities. And then, once they have enough surplus food and a stable society, they start building big, impressive things like temples and monuments. It's a nice, logical progression, isn't it? Agriculture first, then settlement, then civilization, then temples. Makes perfect sense. But Göbekli Tepe, in its quiet, stony wisdom, whispers a different story altogether. It flips that carefully constructed narrative on its head, asking us to consider a truly mind-bending possibility. What if it was the desire for a place like Göbekli Tepe that kick-started agriculture? What if the temple came before the farm? What if the monumental ambition to connect with the cosmos, to gather and worship, was the very spark that ignited the agricultural revolution and led to settled life? Imagine, if you will, the sheer logistics involved in building even one of those massive enclosures. We're talking about quarrying multi-ton pillars, shaping them with incredible precision, then somehow hauling them across rough terrain, and finally, raising them upright. This isn't a weekend DIY project for a couple of buddies. This requires a dedicated workforce, potentially hundreds, maybe even thousands of people. And these aren't just a few strong individuals. These are people who need to be fed, housed, and organized, not for days or weeks, but for months, years, possibly even decades. Now, picture yourself as a hunter-gatherer in this world, over 11,000 years ago. Your entire existence revolves around the hunt, the forage, the constant movement to find sustenance. You follow the herds, you gather seasonal wild fruits and grains. It's a demanding life, but it's what you know. Suddenly, you're part of this colossal construction project. You're not out hunting all day, you're hauling stones. You're not foraging for berries, you're carving patterns. Who's feeding you? Who's feeding your family? This isn't a simple question. A large, non-foraging workforce needs a reliable, consistent food supply. You can't just rely on the luck of the hunt or the whims of the season. You need predictable calories, day in and day out. This is where the idea of Göbekli Tepe as a catalyst truly shines. The sustained effort required to build and maintain such a site would have put immense pressure on traditional hunter-gatherer subsistence strategies. You can't just send out a hunting party for 500 people every day. It's wildly inefficient. It's like trying to cater a modern music festival with only wild berries and whatever you can catch with a pointy stick. Someone would get hangry, fast. Archaeological evidence from Göbekli Tepe itself supports this idea. We find vast quantities of animal bones, particularly from wild species like aurochs, ancient wild cattle, the ancestors of domestic cows, and gazelle, showing that massive feasting events were a regular occurrence. These weren't just small family dinners. These were epic banquets, likely tied to the rituals and gatherings at the temple. Imagine the smell of roasting meat wafting across the hills, the communal sounds of celebration. But think about the logistics again. To feed hundreds, if not thousands, of people for these feasts, and then to feed the workers who were constantly building, you need a lot of food. More than just opportunistic hunting could reliably provide. This relentless demand for sustenance would have naturally pushed people towards more intensive methods of food production. Before full-blown agriculture, there would have been a stage of intensive foraging. People would have started to pay closer attention to wild cereals, the ancestors of our wheat and barley. They'd notice where they grew best, how to harvest them efficiently, how to store them. Perhaps they'd even start to clear areas to encourage their growth, or spread seeds inadvertently as they moved from one harvesting spot to another. It's a small step from noticing a patch of wild wheat to thinking, what if I helped this patch grow even bigger? The Fertile Crescent, the region where Göbekli Tepe sits, is famously known as the cradle of civilization, because it's where agriculture is believed to have first emerged. And it's no coincidence that the wild ancestors of many of our staple crops, like einkorn wheat, emmer wheat, lentils, and peas, were abundant here. It's plausible that the constant need for food at a site like Göbekli Tepe created the perfect conditions for these wild plants to transition into domesticated crops. You're literally cultivating them, even if you don't quite realize the profound implications yet. It's like accidentally inventing the internet while trying to make a better toaster. Suddenly, you've stumbled upon something far more transformative than you intended. Consider the beer hypothesis, a quirky but compelling idea that suggests the desire to produce fermented beverages. Beer being a prime example, might have been a significant driver for early cereal cultivation. Imagine the communal gatherings at Göbekli Tepe, the rituals, the feasting. What better way to foster social cohesion and spiritual ecstasy than with a good, wholesome brew? Producing enough grain for brewing on a large scale would certainly provide a powerful incentive to move beyond simple foraging. If you want a party, you need refreshments, and if those refreshments are grain-based, you better start growing some grain. Once you start cultivating crops, even on a small scale, you quickly realize you can't just pack up your bags and wander off. Your dinner is literally rooted in the ground. You need to tend to it, protect it from pests, harvest it, and store it. This necessity creates a powerful pull towards sedentism, staying in one place. You build more permanent shelters. You invest in your immediate surroundings. And suddenly, without perhaps even a conscious decision to settle down, you find yourself living a more stationary life, all because you had to feed the monumental ambition of your ancestors. So, the sequence potentially reverses. The desire for a shared sacred space like Göbekli Tepe, a place for ritual, for gathering, for connecting with the divine, created an unprecedented demand for resources. This demand pushed hunter-gatherers to intensify their food procurement, leading them to experiment with, and eventually adopt, agriculture. And agriculture, in turn, necessitated permanent settlements. The temple, rather than being a luxury built by settled farmers, became the very crucible in which settled farming was forged. It was the catalyst, the magnet that pulled people together, organized them, and inadvertently set them on the path to civilization. This isn't just about food, though. Göbekli Tepe would have been a central hub, a meeting point for different groups of hunter-gatherers from across the region. Imagine the exchange of ideas, technologies, and knowledge that would have occurred there. As people gathered for rituals and construction, they would have shared observations about plant growth, animal behavior, and tool making. It would have been an ancient university, a knowledge transfer center, albeit one where the curriculum was largely about how to keep a massive construction crew fed and spiritually fulfilled. Historians still argue whether the spiritual need for Göbekli Tepe directly caused agriculture, or if it merely accelerated a process that was already slowly taking shape. Was it the spark, or the fanning of an existing ember? It's a debate that highlights the profound implications of this single site. For centuries, we believed that humans needed to be settled and have a food surplus before they could undertake such complex projects. Göbekli Tepe forces us to consider that perhaps, sometimes, it's the grand, communal vision that drives the practical innovations, not the other way around. It suggests that the human spirit's quest for meaning might be an even more powerful engine of change than our stomachs. You find yourself now, not amidst the dust of millennia, but in the hushed, climate-controlled labs and buzzing field offices where the mysteries of Göbekli Tepe are slowly, painstakingly unraveled. The work here is a meticulous dance between shovel and supercomputer, a modern quest for ancient answers. It's not all Indiana Jones whip-cracking, you know. Mostly it's very precise brushing and a lot of paperwork. Imagine trying to piece together a 10,000-piece jigsaw puzzle where half the pieces are missing, and the other half are buried under a ton of dirt. That's archaeology, folks, but with more sunscreen. The German Archaeological Institute, DI, in close collaboration with the Turkish Ministry of Culture and Tourism, has been the primary force behind these incredible excavations for decades. They're like the world's most patient detectives, sifting through layers of time, not for fingerprints, but for microscopic pollen grains or the faint outline of a long-vanished wooden post. You might think, after all these years, they've uncovered everything, but here's a mainstream historical fact for you: less than 5% of Göbekli Tepe has actually been excavated. Yes, you heard that right. It's like peeking through a keyhole and thinking you've seen the whole mansion. Most of the site remains undisturbed, slumbering beneath its ancient shroud, waiting for future generations, or perhaps just future funding, to reveal its secrets. The archaeologists working on Göbekli Tepe are armed with tools that would make our ancient builders' eyes pop out like those carved animal heads. They're not just digging anymore, they're deploying an arsenal of scientific techniques. You've got your geophysical surveys, for instance, which use ground-penetrating radar, GPR, and magnetometry to map what's underground without even disturbing a single pebble. It's like having X-ray vision for dirt, allowing them to spot buried walls or anomalies that might indicate another T-pillar circle, all before anyone even picks up a trowel. Then there's LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, a fancy way of saying they bounce lasers off the landscape from drones or airplanes to create incredibly detailed 3D maps of the terrain, spotting subtle humps and bumps that might be hidden structures. It's like giving the site a full-body scan. Beyond the mapping, once they do start digging, the analysis goes microscopic. Carbon dating, specifically accelerator mass spectrometry, AMS, is absolutely crucial, allowing them to pinpoint the age of organic materials like charcoal or bone fragments with astonishing precision. This is how we know Göbekli Tepe dates back to that mind-boggling 11,000-year mark. But they also employ archaeobotany, studying ancient plant remains to understand the diet of the builders, the environment they lived in, and even the types of plants they might have cultivated or gathered. You can almost smell the ancient grains and wild fruits wafting from their samples. Similarly, archaeozoology focuses on animal bones, revealing what creatures roamed the landscape, what the builders hunted, and perhaps even which animals held symbolic significance. Imagine piecing together a whole ancient picnic from a few bone fragments and some charred seeds. It's like trying to understand a whole Netflix series from just the opening credits. Then there are the truly cutting-edge techniques. Stable isotope analysis, for example, can tell researchers where individuals lived and what they ate over their lifetime by analyzing the chemical signatures in their bones and teeth. It's like a tiny, biological GPS tracker. And while direct DNA analysis from such ancient sites is challenging, new methods are constantly emerging, potentially offering glimpses into the genetic makeup of these early people, their migration patterns, and their relationships. They're even doing residue analysis on ancient tools and vessels, if they find any, to see what substances were processed or stored, maybe even what strange concoctions were brewed for those sacred rituals. It's all very CSI, Stone Age edition. But despite all this high-tech wizardry, Göbekli Tepe remains a grand, sprawling enigma. The questions that continue to puzzle researchers are perhaps even more numerous than the stones themselves. What, precisely, was its purpose? Was it purely a temple, a sacred space for rituals and communion with the spirit world? Or was it also a meeting place, a prehistoric convention center where different groups gathered for trade, social bonding, and perhaps even settling disputes? Was it an astronomical observatory, with the T-pillars aligned to celestial events? Some archaeologists even propose it was a kind of initiation site, where young men or women underwent rites of passage. The truth is, we don't know for sure, and historians still argue whether its primary function was religious, social, or a complex blend of both. Then there's the monumental question of its labor organization. How did these hunter-gatherer groups, without a central authority, without writing, without even a clear hierarchy, manage to coordinate such massive construction projects? We're talking about moving and carving multi-ton stones, not just once, but repeatedly, over centuries. Was it voluntary communal effort, driven by shared spiritual belief? Or was there some form of charismatic leadership that we simply can't detect in the archaeological record? It's like trying to get 1,000 cats to build a sandcastle, without opposable thumbs or any concept of sandcastle. It's truly baffling. And what about those enigmatic animal carvings? The foxes, snakes, boars, vultures, and spiders that adorn the T-pillars. What do they really mean? Are they totemic animals, representing clans or groups? Are they deities or spirits? Are they part of complex narratives or myths that are now lost to us? There's a quirky or fringe tidbit for you, Some researchers have even suggested that the famous Vulture Stone, Pillar 43, might be a sophisticated star map, or even a depiction of a catastrophic comet impact that occurred around 10,950 BC, with the animals representing constellations or specific moments in time. It's a fascinating, albeit unproven, idea that adds another layer of cosmic mystery to the site. And then, of course, the great backfill mystery continues to perplex everyone. Why, after centuries of painstaking construction and use, was Göbekli Tepe deliberately and meticulously buried? Was it a ritual act of closure, perhaps when the beliefs or practices associated with the site changed? Was it a way to preserve it for future generations, like burying a time capsule? Or was it simply abandoned and covered over by natural processes, or perhaps by later groups who saw it as a quarry for building materials? The sheer scale of the backfill, composed of tons of rubble and earth, suggests a coordinated effort, but the reason for that effort remains one of the site's most tantalizing unsolved puzzles. Was it a conscious goodbye, or a slow fade-out? Beyond Göbekli Tepe itself, researchers are also constantly searching for other similar sites in the region. The discovery of Karahan Tepe, with its own impressive T-pillars and even more explicit human-like figures, confirms that Göbekli Tepe wasn't a one-off anomaly but part of a wider, sophisticated cultural phenomenon. This raises even more questions. How many more sites are out there, waiting to be found? What was the relationship between these different centers? Were they part of a network, sharing ideas and perhaps even pilgrims? The ongoing archaeological work at Göbekli Tepe is a race against time, not just because of the elements, but also the sheer complexity of the site. Every new piece of pottery, every bone fragment, every faint discoloration in the soil is a clue. And with each passing season of excavation, with every new scientific technique applied, the picture becomes a little clearer, a little sharper, but never quite complete. It's like trying to understand a dream you had the night before. You remember flashes, feelings, but the full narrative remains just beyond your grasp. The builders of Göbekli Tepe, it seems, were very good at keeping secrets. And we, the curious descendants, are still trying to unlock them, one brushstroke and one data point at a time. You've journeyed through the dust of millennia, traced the faint echoes of ancient footsteps, and stood, in your mind's eye, amidst the colossal, silent sentinels of Göbekli Tepe. And now, as the last glimmers of our shared exploration begin to fade, it's time to let the profound weight of this place settle upon you, not as a collection of facts or an archaeological puzzle, but as a mirror reflecting something deeply, universally human. Allow yourself, for a moment, to truly feel the connection. Close your eyes if you like. Imagine your own hands, perhaps a little calloused, perhaps a little tired from a day's work, reaching out across 11,000 years to touch the rough, sun-warmed surface of one of those T-shaped pillars. You feel the cool, ancient stone beneath your fingertips, the faint indentations left by countless hands that came before yours. These weren't just abstract figures in a textbook, they were people. People who woke up, stretched, maybe grumbled about the weather, and then dedicated their lives to something far grander than themselves. They had families, friends, rivalries, and probably a favorite spot to watch the sunset after a long day of chiseling rock. You know, just like us, but with significantly fewer streaming services and an abundance of heavy lifting. Think of the sheer, unyielding effort. We've talked about moving mountains of stone, but can you really grasp it? Picture the communal spirit, the grunts of exertion, the synchronized pulling on ropes made of animal hide, the rhythmic clang of stone striking stone. Imagine getting your friends to help you move a couch, let alone a 10-ton stone pillar across a rocky field. Oh, you said it was just a small T-pillar? My bad. I thought we were just assembling IKEA furniture. Yet they did it, time and time again, for centuries. This wasn't a one-off project. It was a generational commitment, a sacred trust passed down from elder to youth, a whisper of purpose carried on the wind across countless seasons. What drove them? It wasn't survival, not in the immediate sense. They were hunter-gatherers, masters of their environment, capable of finding food and shelter without such monumental structures. This is a mainstream historical fact that completely upends our understanding of early human development. Göbekli Tepe, the world's first known temple, was built by people who hadn't yet invented agriculture or permanent settlements. They weren't tied to the land by crops. They were drawn to this site by something else entirely. A spiritual magnetism, perhaps? A desire to connect with forces greater than themselves? When you look at the intricate carvings, the watchful vultures, the slithering snakes, the powerful boars, the enigmatic foxes and scorpions, you're not just seeing ancient art. You're glimpsing their very souls, their fears, their reverence, their understanding of the cosmos. There's a particular stone, sometimes referred to as the vulture stone, that depicts what some researchers speculate might be a catastrophic event, perhaps even a comet strike, with celestial symbols woven into the narrative. It's a quirky, fringe tidbit, yet it speaks to a deeper human impulse: to record, to warn, to remember, to interpret the unpredictable whims of the universe through myth and symbol. They were trying to make sense of their world, just as we are now, albeit with slightly different tools. We have supercomputers and space telescopes. They had sharp flints and an even sharper intellect, coupled with an unparalleled connection to the natural world. And what about the Great Backfill? The perplexing decision to meticulously bury these magnificent structures, sometimes filling them with debris and then building new, slightly different enclosures on top? Archaeologists still debate whether this was an act of ritualistic abandonment, a form of preservation, or perhaps a societal shift that rendered the old ways obsolete. Was it a respectful burial, like putting a beloved elder to rest, or a deliberate severing of ties with a past that no longer served them? We may never know the precise answer, but the act itself speaks volumes about their relationship with their sacred spaces, a relationship far more complex and nuanced than simple construction and demolition. I mean, imagine building a magnificent cathedral and then just burying it. And then building another one right on top, only slightly different. That's like deciding your living room needs a complete redo every few centuries, but with more rocks and fewer power tools. But through all the mystery, the undeniable thread that connects you to them is the universal human quest for meaning and connection. They gathered in these circles, under the vast, stardusted Anatolian sky, to perform rituals we can only guess at. Perhaps they chanted, perhaps they danced, perhaps they shared stories of the hunt or visions of the divine. They sought community, belonging, and a deeper understanding of their place in the grand cosmic tapestry. These aren't just abstract concepts, they are the very bedrock of human experience. From the earliest campfires to the largest cathedrals, from ancient storytelling to modern social media, we are perpetually striving to connect, to understand, to find purpose beyond mere existence. Göbekli Tepe is a profound reminder that this quest isn't new. It didn't begin with philosophers or organized religions as we know them. It began with the first flicker of self-awareness, the first moment a human looked up at the night sky and wondered, why? It began with the impulse to transform the raw materials of the earth into something sacred, something that transcended the everyday. They carved their beliefs into stone, not for future archaeologists to decipher, but for themselves, for their gods, for their community. They built a place where the veil between the mundane and the magnificent was thin, a place where they could touch the divine. If only they'd invented sticky notes back then. FY, don't forget why we buried this. P.S. Bring snacks for the next big dig. So, as you drift towards sleep, let the image of Göbekli Tepe remain with you. Not as a distant, dusty ruin, but as a vibrant testament to the enduring spirit of humanity. Feel the ancient earth beneath your imagined feet, the cool night air on your skin, and the quiet hum of shared purpose that echoes across the millennia. These ancient builders, so far removed in time, are profoundly close in spirit. They remind us that long before cities rose or empires fell, before writing or wheels, before the very idea of civilization as we understand it, there was the human heart, yearning for something more, reaching for the stars, and building wonders out of rock and pure, unadulterated will. They built a temple, not just of stone, but of dreams, of shared beliefs, and of a timeless human longing to connect with something larger than themselves. And in doing so, they connected with you, right here, right now. The journey through Göbekli Tepe, like all great journeys, eventually comes to a gentle close. As the final images of colossal stones and whispering winds begin to soften in your mind, allow yourself to simply be. The ancient dust settles, the echoes of distant chants fade into the quiet hum of your own breathing. There's no rush now, no more mysteries to unravel tonight, just the peaceful sense of a story well told, a history gently explored. Feel the warmth of your covers, the soft support beneath your head, as the last vestiges of those ancient stones recede from your conscious thought. Let your mind drift, untethered, floating on the quiet currents of sleep, carrying with it the subtle understanding that some things, like the human spirit's quest for meaning, truly are timeless. The world outside is still, safe, and waiting for tomorrow. For now, simply rest. Let the night wrap around you like a soft blanket, carrying you deeper into a peaceful slumber. All the questions, all the wonders, can wait. Just peace, now. Just quiet. Just sleep.